Good evening. This study session of the Board of Education for February 10th, 2015 is called to order. I'd like to extend a warm welcome to everyone present and to our television viewers. While our study sessions are generally limited to receipt of information from staff and discussion of that information, as well as review of resolutions prior to a vote, at times, like tonight, we do conduct votes during study sessions. Any item that will be voted on this evening has been posted as required by state law. This meeting is being televised live and will be replayed throughout the next 2 weeks. Please check the board website for replay times, and it's also being streamed live on our PPS TV Services website. And just a note, very glad to have folks from the public here tonight, of course, but just a note that as always, our policy on holding up the signs is that you need to be sure you're not blocking the folks behind you. So we appreciate your cooperation in that. As well as we want to make sure, out of respect for the folks who are presenting, that the audience tries to keep your comments. If you need to have a conversation, maybe to go out into the foyer and have them there so that we can be sure the folks who are up here providing testimony or information can be heard and can have a respectful moment for what they're providing. So thank you for that very much. So with that, we will start out with public comment tonight. Ms. Houston, can you start out with the first two names?
Yes. That would be Anne and Amelia Witt.
Great. So thank you so much for being here tonight and providing your comments. We are really looking forward to hearing your thoughts, reflections, and concerns. We're going to actively listen and reflect on them, but not respond directly at this time. We do have our board manager, Roseanne Powell, over there in the audience, so if you have questions afterward, you can follow up with her. So guidelines for public input emphasize respect and consideration of others. Complaints about individual employees should be directed to the superintendent's office, won't be heard in this forum. So you have a total of 3 minutes. Please begin by stating your name and spelling your last name for the record. During the first 2 minutes, a green light will appear. When the yellow light comes on, you have 1 minute left, and then when the red light comes on, we respectfully ask that you wrap up your comments. So thanks again for being here. We really appreciate it, and you may begin.
All right, my name is Amelia Witt, W-I-T-T, and I am a sophomore at Cleveland High School, and we are writing an English paper about how we feel about school. And I point out that kids are sitting in desks day after day, and often the learning feels very morphed and insignificant, and sometimes it's hard to remember. But when learning is associated with something like outdoor school, learning feels very powerful, and it feels very important, and the kids can connect the learning to amazing memories that they have at outdoor school. Outdoor school gives amazing teaching in science, as well as things like people skills. Kids learn amazing teamwork, communication, and how bonded they can be to a group of people, like the people in their cabin, for example. And I just think that half a week is not enough time for these kids to learn all that they can and to form those very strong bonds with their cabin and their camp. I was fortunate enough to go for a full week of outdoor school, and it was one of the most amazing experiences I've had, and I'm never going to forget it. I was one of the kids that was sobbing on the bus ride home. Mm-hmm. It really fueled a passion for science for me, and I've actually been considering that as a career. And I think that it's very important to open these kids' eyes to science as a possible career for them as well. So I just think that it's truly unfair that these kids won't get the experience that I did, and I think that that should be changed.
Thank you.
My name is Anne Witt, W-I-T-T. I'm the mom of Amelia Witt, 10th grader at Cleveland High School, and also the mom of a 6th grader, Erin, at Hosford Middle School. As you heard, Amelia was fortunate enough to go for a full week, and Erin went this fall for a half week. But to be honest, I'm not really here to speak for my kids. My kids are really fortunate. They have many wonderful outdoor experiences, and they have and will have for the rest of their lives. I'm here to speak about and for other children who don't have those experiences. My most favorite job that I've ever had was as an outdoor school teacher on the Chesapeake Bay in Baltimore, or outside of Baltimore. And the students that I remember most from that 1.5 year experience were kids from inner city Baltimore who had never stepped foot out of their neighborhood. some of those 12-year-olds were already parents, and they were exuberant and ecstatic at our outdoor school. It was just a remarkable experience for them, and to have had a full week of that experience was life-changing for them to see the possibilities outside of their neighborhood. I now am a Portland Public School speech pathologist, so I work across the district for special needs students. And again, the student I remember the most was a statuesque 6th grade Native American boy who was living in his car at the time I knew him and was really stuck in just a terrible situation. And the fact that he got to leave that and see the possibilities and go to outdoor school for a week at that time, I hope and I think was transformative for him. So that's why I'm here. I think kids will be fine with the short week, but I think the long week, as my daughter has stated, really solidifies the experience and lets kids know that there's life beyond the neighborhood, the car, the toddler, or whatever they're dealing with in their lives in the city. So thank you for your time, and I'm very excited to be here with my daughter. As you can tell, this is a very important passion of both of ours.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for being here, both of you.
Our last two speakers, Scott Bailey and Sue Shattuck.
Go ahead, Scott. Hopefully Sue will join.
Good evening. My name is Scott Bailey, and I'm here tonight representing the Board of Directors of Community and Parents for Public Schools. Thank you in advance for listening. The theme of what I'm going to say tonight is unfinished business, but before I get into that, I've got to finish some other business. You're going to be hearing from the Bond Accountability Committee tonight. Ted Wolf, who's the CPPS Vice President, testified at their recent public meeting and wanted me to forward a brief summary of his comments. Ted made two important points. First, when it comes to the design advisory groups that are part of the process of rebuilding our schools, the composition of these groups has been overrepresented by PPS staff as opposed to members of the public. And they haven't done a very good job, really, of being representatives in terms of communicating with the public. So there's some work to be done there. Second, the BAC needs to expand its work to fulfill its mission. The BAC was charged by you, the school board, to track the alignment of the bond program with the goals and principles of the long-range facilities plan. While the committee's work so far has closely tracked the program's adherence to the principle of fiscal prudence through the balanced scorecard and other reports, it has not included any systematic look at the program's adherence to the principles of sustainability, inclusivity, and with the exception of Concordia, partnerships. So there's more work to be done there. I'm serving on the what does DBRAC stand for? District-Wide Boundary Review Advisory Committee. It's a daunting task to redraw boundaries for the entire district, especially given the tight timeline if the goal is to implement new boundaries by the fall of 2016. It's even more challenging given the number of unresolved issues in Portland Public Schools, including some that SACIT had to deal with in its work that made that more complex. Grade configuration, the lack of any kind of a plan that matches the educational programs with actual facility layout and size, the lack of clarity on the role and location of focus option programs, the lack of a long-term plan for expanding immersion programs. While we're supportive of immersion programs, dual language immersion expanding, there seems to be very little coordination with facilities planning on that. The location of special education programs, which seem to be moved around willy-nilly. Access, which also is a nomad. Where will it end up next? There are other unresolved issues as well, but I'm going to run it out of time. At bottom, though, once again, I'll get down on my hands and knees if you want, to ask you to please start a process of bringing this district an educational vision and a strategic plan. Every time our committees grapple with these issues, there are pieces that come together that need to be coordinated, and we need those values to drive that, to bring us together to make progress. And I'm out of time, so I'll stop there. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Do you want to call the other person's name one more time?
It was Sue Shattuck.
Sue Shattuck, not with us? Okay. All right then, thank you all very much for sharing your views with us tonight. We appreciate it. So tonight, we're going to get our quarterly update from the Bond Accountability Committee. So wanted to invite down Kevin Spellman and Luis Fontenot to the speaker's table to present your report. Thanks so much for being here.
Good evening. Co-Chair Atkins, members of the board, Superintendent Smith. Your Bond Accountability Committee met January 21st for our quarterly meeting at Grant High School. And we were pleased to be joined by three directors. Thank you for attending. Director Belisle, Director Kohler, Director Buell. Before we get into the report, I want to thank you as a board for reappointing two of our valuable members, Tom Peterson and Willie Paul. Both had 2-year terms when we started this, and they agreed to put themselves forward for reappointment, and you granted that, and we really appreciate that. They're valuable folks. At the meeting, we received updates from staff that included the balanced scorecard. We looked at each of the bond projects individually. We looked at where we sit with the recommendations from the performance audit from last year. And we touched on bond work that related to historic significance and capital partnerships, and we'll talk a little more about that. The large projects that are out there, Roosevelt and Franklin high schools, are at a critical point. Negotiations continue with the CMGCs to get the guaranteed maximum price, and that's at a point where there's a significant shift of risk from the district to the contractor. The scope of the projects really gets tied down, and the price risk, at least to a large extent, moves over to the contractor. So we're anxious for that to happen, and I'm sure you are too. Grant High School project is starting to get underway, and since that a project director has been appointed, and we'll be moving promptly now into selection of a design team. And master planning will start mid-year. Fabian PK8 school replacement is underway again after taking a little bit of a hiatus while Concordia did their fundraising exercise. IP14 is coming to a close. There was the work that was scheduled for the summer, as you recall, was completed on time and on budget. But each of those, 3 of those schools, I think, had elevator work still to be done, and that's getting concluded right now. Planning for IP15 is underway. The designs are on schedule for earlier notices to proceed than last year, with any luck. Because if you recall, we had some lessons to learn there about the ramp-up time that's needed between bid and starting work. Following the meeting, we were given access to the district's financial audit, which includes the bond program, and we won't dwell on that because we were pleased to see no questions raised about how the bond is being handled. So the key issues for us really are the same as last time we were here. That's not to say nothing's happened, but the focus on these issues remain. Schedule, particularly Roosevelt and Franklin, remain a concern. Both of those schools are behind the baseline schedule. There is a plan to bring them back, but at this point it's a plan. It's not in place yet. So we're continuing to watch that. Construction documents on both of those projects is being phased or will be phased, as will the building permits. And that's a common approach to these kinds of projects, but it's not without some risk. So again, we'll be watching how that process goes. And as I said, the guaranteed maximum price will also be a key issue. Planning for IP15, we looked at keenly because this summer we only have 65 calendar days to do this work. And there are going to be 7 construction contracts, and sometimes the number of the size of contracts doesn't matter quite as much in managing them quite as much as the number of them. So 7 construction contracts over the summer is a significant management task, and so we'll be watching that. Budget is always an issue, of course. The program budget is now $522 million, including the 15 from Concordia. The biggest concern, other than the guaranteed maximum prices, which I won't dwell on anymore, relates to market conditions. We have a lot of concern about the effect of market conditions on pricing as these projects are bid out. We had some struggles with IP14, if you remember, and so we're concerned about IP15 and indeed the bidding out of the high schools. Once the IP projects were bid, the work came in under budget and we didn't use all our contingencies, and that's a good thing. So that pays back some of that overage in the first place, but that is a concern of ours. Equity continues to be a focus of ours. Student participation remains encouraging. There's been a change, if you recall, on how we're conducting that and how we're measuring that. So we'll continue to watch that going forward. The first exercise of the workforce hiring program through the summer exceeded expectations. The number of apprentices employed on those projects exceeded the goal, so that's a good thing. MWESBs, minority women-owned businesses and emerging small businesses, continues to be a challenge. It hasn't changed significantly since we were here before. Not much work has been done. But on the plus side, $3.7 million has been paid to those firms, which is 9% of total payments. We remain optimistic about how the high schools will perform in that area. Consultants are meeting the 18% goal, which is pretty incredible, but that's partly because some of the IP architectural firms qualify so that those entire contracts are counted towards that goal, and some of the other projects are falling a little short. So we don't think that those other projects should get off just because someone else exceeded their goal. So we're going to continue pressure there. Stakeholder perspective, generally the feedback, as you'll see in the balanced scorecard when Jim presents it, is generally very positive, with the exception of Roosevelt Design Advisory Group, which shows as yellow. We heard, obviously, Scott Bailey's comments reporting on Ted's report for their organization, and Ted did speak to us, not this time before, and we agreed that we should learn lessons from how the design advisory groups have been successful and not so successful. And going forward onto Grant High School, we should certainly incorporate those. And we understand that there are adjustments in the charter for the Grant High School DAGs, and we think that's appropriate, including having fewer PPS staff members and more of community members. We also listened to, I'll credit Ted with this, we did listen to his comments at our prior meeting when he reminded us that we're supposed to be looking at things other than just budget and schedule and equity and those kinds of things. So we have put on our agenda at least a kind of checklist of trying to look at those other metrics. Some of them are really hard to measure other than in a holistic way. But this time we looked at historic buildings and what the bond program has done in terms of historic structures and capital partnerships. And it's clear, obviously, that the Concordia piece has kind of overwhelmed that, but there are a number of other partnerships out there, and we should continue focusing on those. Just like the MWESB, just because we do really well here doesn't mean we shouldn't be trying elsewhere. Summary, our next meeting I think will be very instructive because I believe the GMPs will be solidified and we'll know exactly where we are in those high schools and we can be moving forward. I wouldn't want to finish without saying once again that we remain impressed with the teams that you have both employed and hired as outside consultants and contractors, and we think you have a pretty good team going there. Louis, do you want to add anything?
No. From my perspective, everything is going very smoothly now. We are concerned with schedule and escalations, as Kevin said earlier, and of course participation with the MWESBs. But it looks like we'll know more about all of those in the coming months, and hopefully we will get some better visibility, especially with schedule, but with all three of those. And so we'll see what happens next quarter.
Great, thank you so much. So board members, comments or questions? Steve?
Thank you again for your great work. Did you learn any lessons, do you think, around the teacher involvement? And the teacher involvement they're pretty critical of that, the way they were involved in the Roosevelt and Franklin design process. I mean, do we have stuff where we're going to do better in Grant? Or is that a lesson that isn't laid out? Or I don't know, you're kind of looking like, well, what are you talking about? Maybe.
No, I understand what you're talking about. Thank you. We haven't focused on that, Director Buell. My understanding is that teacher staff, non-teacher staff at the schools have been given opportunities to become involved. And I saw some, and I know some of you have seen some of that certainly at Franklin. And even at Roosevelt, there were teachers involved in the DAG. And going forward, they won't be involved in the DAG, so there's got to be other forums for them made available, absolutely.
Well, yeah, and to some degree, I think the problem was built around the way they were involved.
Could be.
And they didn't feel like they were truly involved, many of the teachers, that they were kind of the same old halfway involved, and now we can say they're involved, but not really involved, so I don't know. I just think it'd be nice if we look at that in Grant.
Okay.
I know that's not your job, but I was putting that out there.
Director Rita?
I actually had a similar question. I don't know if this was your decision or if it was somebody else's decision, but you have a paragraph in here about stakeholder perspective, which talks about lessons learned, and especially from the Roosevelt design team. And lessons learned in terms of implementation for Grant High School, there would be a clearer statement of purpose. PPS staff members other than the school principal will be excluded. And so that actually concerns me. So is there anybody who can explain to us what is going on here? One of the things that I actually heard the most from the Roosevelt process is that, in fact, we should have had a teacher with career technical education experience on the design committee to kind of advise the rest. So I'm confused about this whole stakeholder paragraph.
So Jim Owens is raising his hand in the back as willing to come on up and talk about, because we've done a number of lessons learned on this first round, but I'll let Jim come on up and share.
I mean, I think there's lots of room for improvement, but I'm not understanding where this is going.
So as I understand the question around the teacher involvement in the design advisory groups, these were chartered groups that are intended to be comprised of community members who provide input to the design team. The committees report directly to our OSM project directors for the projects, and they're intended to provide broad input in terms of the work. They're advisory in nature. We don't seek consensus among them. We collect input. The opportunity to get input from teachers runs on a parallel track. So that the project teams, the design teams actually engage teachers at multiple levels at the building, and they work very collaboratively with them to ensure that input is received. We actually feel that the process that is in place to get input is very sound. The reason we're planning to change the configuration of the charter for Grant is to primarily have the principal of Grant High School be present, to have students represented, to have community represented, and then to continue on engaging teachers in a parallel fashion. In terms of what I've seen, I feel we've had a great deal of teacher input, and as we speak, the collaboration that is going on at Franklin and Roosevelt is resulting in a plan that's going to be very, very deliberately crafted and is going to result in our ability to complete these projects so that when the construction is completed, the teachers are going to know what to expect. And they'll be involved not only during the master planning and the design phase, but also during construction phase. So when we get the work completed and we need that complete and usable facility, those teachers will be fully on board. I don't know if that fully responds to your question, but it's the way we've approached the DAG process.
Steve?
Mr. Owens, did anybody sit down and talk with teacher representatives from your office? Sit down and talk with teacher representatives from Franklin and Roosevelt to see what they thought of the process and if they had any suggestions? Did you actually sit down with the people and ask them those questions?
I personally have participated in a number of sessions with teachers. Our OSM project directors have had far more engagement with them, and we have a very detailed record of all the feedback that's been provided. In addition to teachers, our operations staff have been very actively integrated into the design work. That's IT, nutrition services, maintenance and operations, security. It's a very holistic approach to ensure that all of the district participants who operate and maintain and teach out of these facilities are engaged. So my confidence level in Roosevelt and Franklin is we have had extensive involvement.
So the answer is no to my question.
The answer is yes.
You have actually sat down with the representatives, the head reps in both buildings, and sat down with them and asked them specifically what you needed to fix about the field?
And it continues. It hasn't ended. The teachers have been involved through the design phases. As we move into our third phase for construction documents, they're involved. As we move through construction, they'll be involved. So there's no end to that involvement. There's a continual engagement process that's designed into this.
Thank you.
Other comments, questions? Director Black?
I just want to thank you both and your colleagues for taking the time and making the effort to sit on our accountability committee. I know that every time I sit in on those meetings, I learn a great deal, and I really appreciate what you were saying, Elise, about concern about the MWESB efforts and proposing solutions. It's not just why isn't this, but here are some ways that you can do it. And I would imagine staff are appreciating that because I know everybody is working extremely hard and quickly, but want to also be really thoughtful about how we move forward. So thank you both for your time. And I just want to say how exciting this is. Again, I know that sometimes what I see about input process, and I appreciate, Mr. Owens, what you're saying, is it's one of those things that I think at Franklin, at least my experience was the teachers that were on the DAG did a great job of going back to their colleagues and sharing that they saw themselves as true representatives with a responsibility. At the same time, even though that was true, there was a part in the process where all of a sudden, people who weren't paying attention for whatever reason, we all live busy lives, realized that were some decisions that had been made, and they got really frustrated because they weren't aware of those decisions. And so continuing, how do we loop that? It reminds me of a spiraling of curriculum. How do we loop back and how do we come back for? And at the same time, I think that's a nature of public processes a little bit, that until something resonates with somebody, they don't engage until they realize that it was important to them. So thank you for your efforts and thank you for being here.
Thanks, down this way. Dr. Morton.
Thank you both. I think my only quick comment is regarding MWESBs and the need for us to do better. I mean, I think there are some goals that are, I think, being met, and as you say in your summary, there's a need for us to either do more engagement of MWESBs, or very likely, at least the feedback I've received, is that the process by which we go out is one that is in fact limiting to smaller and emerging businesses. So I don't know how much flexibility we have. I wouldn't be surprised if we had small business owners and other contractors come and present to the board on this same issue during public testimony, but I would highly encourage us taking a deeper look into how our process is right now and how in that process we're able to maximize partnership with MWESBs.
Yeah, Director Morton, we agree with that, and there are limitations because of the fact that the district hasn't had a disparity study, so you can't set goals. That's just the legal fact. And so when you go out to bid work, as on the IP work, there is no mandate. So in some senses, you could say achieving 9% on that work is pretty good.
Sure.
Now, the goal, though, is 18, so
Right.
it's not good enough. Once we get into the CMGC work, there is more flexibility on the part of those CMGCs in working with smaller businesses, minority, women-owned ESBs. And we've seen greater success in CMGC work than in bid work. So we're hopeful that we know both of the contractors well, and they have good histories with that community. So, and they understand it's important to us and important
Great.
to you.
That's great.
And I, just as a quick follow-up.
Oh, yeah.
Uh,
I think Mr. Fontenot maybe had
Oh,
something to say.
sorry, I apologize.
Yes, we hope that we do indeed see that. But one of the tough things is that as long as it remains a goal, it's aspirational. You know, we hit it, okay. You know, when you are a contractor or a consultant and you're going for work, and when it's a requirement, you meet the requirement or you don't get the work.
Right.
As long as it's a goal, it's aspirational, so you'll do your very best, especially in explaining why you did not achieve the goal if you don't achieve it, and then you get the work and you go on to the next one. So it would help, as you all know, if one day it does indeed become a requirement instead of a goal, because I think that'll help nudge some people towards that finish line of ultimately being more inclusive with these contracts.
So is that an action that we can take as a board?
My understanding is that there's a legal prohibition for the board taking that action absent a disparity study. I'm not a lawyer in that area, but that's what I've observed elsewhere.
This will be a surprise. I'm not either. I will just very. I will say, well, two more things. One is that I will probably not be one of the people suggesting that 9% is a good number. And there's also one piece that, from my perspective, I have sort of a philosophical leaning, and that philosophical leaning is that for decades, public entities have invested billions of dollars in our community here in building the capacity and the infrastructure of organizations of contractors to the point where they can do things like win 80% of the bids that they put out for the city because they have that capacity and everyone knows they do. What I think we can do as an organization is say that we're gonna find a way to build capacity of others as well. Not that we have to forget or push aside other contractors, but that in fact we have $482 million that can be invested in building the infrastructure of MWESBs, and that's good for Portland, it's good for Oregon, it's good for the catchment area of Portland Public Schools. So that's sort of my philosophical, and I'm not saying that that's any different than anyone else's, but that's my philosophy, and I think to some extent, I think we have that same obligation of building infrastructure within our community to hire and to do the work that will make us more competitive in the future. So, thank you.
Well said. Other?
Ruth, I had one.
Oh, Bobby? Yeah.
So I had one other quick question on the front page. You say, "We are pleased to hear that the state has awarded a $1.3 million seismic rehabilitation grant to Franklin to augment the planned seismic improvements, and that sum will be added to the project budget." So my question was, how did that come about? Who should we be thanking? And what will that allow us to do that we weren't able to do before?
Jim, I'm going to take that.
So you get the second question while you are up here. PPS has participated in the Seismic Rehabilitation Grant Program initiatives for the last several years. You may recall early in the bond programs, hard to believe I'm saying that, but in 2013, we had an SRGP grant, $1.5 million for Alameda.
Alameda, yeah.
What it allows us to do is to increase the level of seismic improvement to a higher standard than we might otherwise accomplish. So we compete competitively with other school districts and public agencies for this work. This round of SRGP, we actually submitted 4 applications, and the one that was successful, based on a number of factors, least of which we have an active bond, and we can leverage our dollars more effectively. But we were able to demonstrate that the Franklin project, because of the character of the historic main facility, would benefit from doing a full seismic rehabilitation. So we took advantage of that, frankly, and have been able to use that to our advantage.
Good.
So it's a great opportunity. I
That's
think
great.
the state are the people to thank for it. And
Okay.
it used to be Office of Emergency Management. Now it's a different group, but they run these, and they'll continue. So PPS will continue to participate in the process.
That's great. Thank you.
So I'll just chime in maybe with a follow-up on that. So in terms of our other buildings, though, Roosevelt in particular, will we be able to have parity in terms of what we can provide in terms of seismic improvements?
So this bond program has us doing incremental seismic improvements at a number of our schools. And as we do our roof tear-offs and replacements, we're doing seismic improvement.
Right.
We're not able to do it at the same level that these SRGP grants allow us to do. And because we weren't successful at the others, we're using this at Franklin. But we'll continue with our plan to do the seismic improvements per the bond measure.
Well, I meant in particular the other high schools, where we're doing the full modernization versus just the roof.
We're doing the full seismic rehabilitation with or without the grants.
So I think
Correct.
folks listening to this might think that Franklin was going to get a higher level of safety in terms of seismic upgrades.
Yeah,
Okay,
that's
just wanted
a
to be
great
clear on that.
clarification. No, it's,
Different level of safety, yeah.
we're
Okay.
taking advantage of a program that allowed us to augment our budget.
Okay.
Other schools, though, that are being fully modernized will have the full
Okay.
seismic rehabilitation.
All right, thanks for clarifying that, and congratulations on getting the funding. I mean, I guess I just would weigh in terms of the DAG composition piece. I mean, I totally get that we have many other avenues for teachers to weigh in, but I guess from my perspective, it would make sense to have at least one teacher on the DAG. I don't know why we wouldn't, so just putting that out there as my 2 cents. It just seems like it just stirs up questions of why isn't there a representative from teachers if there are from other folks as well. So that makes sense to me. And then in terms of the testimony we heard earlier, I mean, I appreciate very much that you're listening to that and looking at expanding somewhat your scope, but I guess from my perspective, what I recall is that this committee was specifically charged around, the composition was made up in terms of your expertise as industry experts and professionals in the field, so that you really were never, this group was never intended to be a broad community stakeholder group, as I recall. It was really oversight from that fiscal construction expertise perspective. And I just wanted to confirm my recollection of what your charge was.
Well, I think, Co-Chair Atkins, I think you are generally correct. That's and that has been our focus. Schedule, budget, scope have been really the key elements, and as you kick off a program like this, it kind of has to be. But I think the charter did list, I think Ted's right, it did list other items from the long-range facility plan. And so we do feel obliged to look at those and
Great.
to see, and to make sure they're not forgotten in the, as the bond moves forward.
Yeah, no, that's terrific. Yeah, Director Lau. No, that's all I had.
Okay.
Other than thanking you, as always, for all your work and dedication. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
I just wanted to highlight that I know one of those is the sustainability of the materials, and I know that we're too early in that process as we're getting maximum price right now. But after all that value engineering, I'll be really curious to hear because I know one of our plans was to say, let's not save early and then spend later in the long term of our systems. Let's get quality materials as much as we can. And I know that it's always a balance as you try to get the price within the budget. But so I will be interested in that. So I just tee that up as something that I'd appreciate.
That's on our list. Yeah, absolutely.
All right,
Yeah.
thank you very much to the
Thank
Bond
you.
Accountability
Thank you.
Committee. Thanks for being
Thanks.
here tonight. So Jim gets to stay here because we're now going to segue into the quarterly update on our capital improvement bond from Jim Owens and others and friends.
Thank you, Co-Chair Atkins, and thank you again for the opportunity to present OSM's quarterly update on our bond program. I would like to begin by also thanking the Bond Accountability Committee for their report tonight. We work very closely with the team, and we have 7 community volunteers who participate, and they do bring to the table expertise in public finance, construction, and a really broad perspective that really helps to provide that level of community oversight and that community perspective into their work. So we're really pleased to have such a wonderful team there. I think the report is also an excellent reflection of the program status. Will allow me to avoid going into the details of the balanced scorecard because they really hit the high points. I'm going to hit a few as well before we get into the main theme tonight on Makerspace. But also, I think that the material that we provide on a regular basis is very much aligned with their review, very much consistent with the charter. And as you know, as a board-appointed committee, they are reporting to you based on those charter components that they have. I also think that it continues to be the proper level of community oversight. Our design advisory groups, by contrast, are committees that are intended to provide specific input to specific projects, so there's a different character of the groups, and I know sometimes there's a tendency to think that the Bond Accountability Committee and the Design Advisory Groups have similar charge, but they don't. They're very, very different charge. In your board packages tonight is the January update of the balanced scorecard, and again, I'm not going to go through that in detail, but it certainly provides a good summary of where we are as of the end of January. And we'll continue to report to you across the different perspectives of budget, schedule, stakeholder, and equity. Many of the comments that were made by the BAC certainly resonate with staff, and we're working very diligently on addressing those. Failed to mention that I'm joined tonight by John Wilhelmy, who is our Office of School Modernization Education Liaison, and he's going to be presenting a topic that's very important to us on Makerspace. So really want to reserve the time for John to go through that. But what I'd like to do is highlight the really some of the main items I'd like to leave you with tonight. Certainly echoing the BAC's report, Kevin and Lewis's summary. The program is in the green. We remain on time, on budget, and visible to the community. Those are three metric areas that we're paying a lot of attention to, and the visible to the community is manifested in many ways, least of which is our very excellent bond website, but also a number of community engagements that occur, a number of forums where we spend time conveying to the public what these dollars are producing for us as a school district. The high schools, as has been mentioned, are rapidly moving through the completion of design phase, and believe it or not, we're planning groundbreaking ceremonies for early May. So the work there is about to get started. There are a lot of major activities that staff is working on to be ready for that. Certainly the negotiation of the guaranteed maximum price for both the Franklin and Roosevelt project is commanding a huge amount of time from the teams right now, but very confident that we're going to land on a GMP value that is consistent with our budget expectations, provides adequate contingency as we begin construction phase, and will allow us to complete these very complex historic rehabilitation projects on time and on budget. We also provided in your packet a detailed construction phasing plan for Roosevelt High School. I know there's a lot of interest in terms of how are we going to move 1,000 kids from building to building over a 2-year period. And I'm not planning to go into that in detail tonight, but if there are questions about it, it was primarily intended to lay out some of the expectations we have, and for the building level leadership to be able to plan around how they're phasing the work so that the teaching and learning activities continue with minimal disruption. And I would be the first to point out that in doing work of this magnitude, there will be some, but we're working very hard to minimize that. And it's a real credit to the full team, including our consultants and our builders, to ensure that that happens. Our summer work continues to proceed. Again, the work for this summer, we've got 7 major construction solicitations that are about to go out, and that's going to represent another significant undertaking. We've got 28 schools that we're planning to make improvements at this summer, which is very significant, and we are very optimistic that that'll go well. The completion of the elevators at the 3 schools, James John, Hosford, and Beach, are very much on track, and we're planning a celebration of sorts at James John in early March to reflect our ability to complete this work and to be able to turn that over to the school for use. It's really providing opportunities for kids to have access to spaces and programs that they haven't previously had the same access to. And then lastly, we'd like to highlight that we have begun work on IP 16, our summer 2016 improvement work. We're about to go out. We actually have just issued a request for proposal for 1 or 2 architects to take on the design of that work. And as part of our lessons, starting this summer work as early as possible really benefits us. In your packets, I think you received earlier the selection criteria that was used for IP 16. And it was very similar to the same criteria that we use for IP 15 around roof condition, around seismic, and around combined underserved. So it's very much in line with the way we've been approaching selection of the school sites to improve over the summer. And then the last comment I'd like to make is the construction market continues to evolve. As we come further out of recession, we're seeing construction costs increasing, and so we're anxious to see, as a result of these 7 bid contracts, to see where we're going to land on that. So we're paying attention to that. We have a number of other school districts that are now actively engaged in their own bond programs, and so it's really putting a strain on the contractor community. So it's an area that we'll continue to monitor, and we'll be sharing some of our perspective with you on that. So at this time, I'd like to turn it over to John, who will highlight a really important topic around Makerspace. Then we'd like to close with a short video around Franklin High School, which I think you'll enjoy, that will highlight the work that's been done, that we're planning to do there. And at the completion of that, we'd like to invite any questions you might have. So John.
Great, thank you, Jim. Co-chair, is this on? I've got I'm at the mercy of my soft voice here. I guess we all are. I'll try and be loud here. So co-chairs Adkins and Knowles, Superintendent Smith, directors and student representative, good evening. Again, I'm John Wilhelmi, Education Liaison, and I've been asked to provide you with an update of our Makerspaces. As a prelude, I want to remind the board of the many new learning spaces in our modernized schools. Gone is the notion of the central hallway flanked by classrooms on both sides, and new to the modernized schools will be greater commons spaces and what we are calling flex spaces, brain bars, as well as maker spaces. So think of our modernized schools as now having the option and flexibility to extend the classroom learning experience to throughout the entire school, allowing for learning that is more applied, hands-on, project-based, learning by doing. On the screen is a photograph of a commons area at Raisbeck Aviation High School in Seattle. Raisbeck was designed by Bassetti Architects, the same firm working on Roosevelt. As you can see, soft seating allows this common space to be a learning area where students can gather and collaborate throughout the day. Our modernized schools, including Franklin, Roosevelt, Grant, and Fabian, will have commons areas. Another learning space we're calling Flexspace. Flexspace, as seen here at High Tech High International School in San Diego, allows for learning immediately outside the classroom. Transparency, seen in the form of glass windows and low-lying walls, allows for both supervision of the flex space and to help inspire students as to the learning opportunities and goings-on throughout the school, both inside and outside the traditional classroom. Here's a flex space at Raisbeck High. Note the right hand wall is a dry erase board. There's a classroom in the distance, as well as another classroom, traditional classroom, behind where this photograph was taken. A brain bar, also seen here at Raisbeck, is a counter with stools or not, and ample connectivity and charging stations for students' myriad electronic devices. We're seeing this kind of thing, this concept implemented in many of our nation's airports. So, to makerspaces. What is Makerspace? This photograph is of ADX in Portland, a large makerspace which is open to the public. It charges, ADX charges a usage fee. On their website, they state ADX is a collaborative makerspace where individuals and organizations make and learn by sharing tools, knowledge, and experience. In the following few slides, you will see that makerspaces take many forms. It's important to note that makerspaces vary in many ways, including the size of the space, the amount, type, sophistication of equipment, the types of things that can be made in the space, portability and flexibility of the space, that is, are the furniture, fixtures, and equipment movable or not? Makerspaces vary on availability, when and who can use the space, and they vary by supervision, who's ensuring safety of the space, and they can vary by budget, personnel, equipment, maintenance, and materials. But first, a quick little bit of history. If there's a founder to the current makerspace movement, it's probably Dale Doherty, pictured in the upper left. He's the founder of Make Magazine, which was founded in January 2005, about 10 years old. And you can see the Make brand with the block red and light blue lettering. Besides Make Magazine, Doherty produces Maker Fair and Maker Shed. A Maker Fair was held at the White House last year, last September. A mini Maker Fair was held outside OMSI in Portland. So here's a makerspace in New York, just some tables set out at the New York Hall of Science with some materials available for people to tinker with. Common in my research are makerspaces, on makerspaces are the number of libraries cordoning off space as makerspace, as seen here at the library in Detroit. Also in Detroit, these students are taking things apart. Reverse engineering is a key component to design and learning how things are made. This makerspace in San Francisco is more equipment intensive. As is the ATX Co-op Hackerspace in Austin, Texas. Lots of stuff. Makerspaces are international. Note the spaciousness of this makerspace in Chile. Makerspaces can combine workspace with soft seating to encourage collaboration, as seen here in France. Here's an outdoor makerspace in Togo with just a couple tables. And these women at this makerspace in Cairo are learning how to solder. The next few slides will help illustrate the many uses of makerspace. Makerspaces can have a heavy emphasis on a particular area of focus, such as woods or metals, or makerspaces can accommodate many areas of focus, such as textiles, electronic circuits, robotics, or science. On the left is an Arduino computer with instrumentation to measure the soil. And on the right is a protein structure made with a 3D printer. Another possible field of focus in a makerspace is engineering. And as far as equipment, some of the more high-end equipment in makerspaces include 3D printers, laser cutters, or CNC cutters, allowing for both additive and reductive projects. So, makerspaces in schools. Here is a before floor plan of in a series of photographs of the Woods and Auto Shop complex at Eugene's Churchill High School. Churchill modernized this complex into a STEM facility in the spring of 2013, seen in this slide. So we went from auto shop, wood shop, to environmental studio, STEM studio, workshop, and conference room. This is a photograph of the STEM workshop area seen in the middle of this slide right here, the workshop area. If we zoom down, this is what we're looking at. Note the lack of equipment and high degree of portability. Note the lifting door, sound mitigation panels on the wall. The students are using the space not only to build, but to conduct experiments. The students are moving catapults in this picture, where they'll test what they've learned about force and trajectory in their physics class. Another note that Churchill has adopted for a spacious, highly flexible STEM workshop where both making and experimentation can take place, depending on need. Most of the furnishings are on wheels. Permanent fixtures such as counters are minimal and set to the side. Secure storage rooms occupy the corner of the workshop. And as for usage, this workshop sits between the two STEM studios. So on my visit this past fall, the studios comprised a physics class on one side and a math class on the other. Most of the usage of the workshop, or this makerspace, was by students enrolled in the adjacent classes. So the current plan for PPS makerspaces is to actually promote a wider usage than the Churchill usage. The OTL vision is to pilot makerspaces at our modernized high schools that are available to all students all day across the entire school, either in the form of whole classes using the space, small groups using the space, or individual students using the space. So like media centers or computer labs of today, makerspaces will be available on a sign-up basis, so no courses will be scheduled into the makerspaces per se during the school day. They're not going to be encumbered with courses. Envision are students working on projects from many disciplines, from STEM courses to language arts, social studies, to world language, and arts and beyond. So we're really talking about wide usage of the Makerspace. To encourage maximum usage, OTL will be proposing that our Makerspaces be staffed full-time. In addition, OTL will work to offer PD to teachers of all disciplines on ways to use the Makerspace. OTL is currently working with project directors in the procurement of fixtures, furniture, and equipment of our Makerspaces. And the Makerspaces will be a minimum, they've set a minimum of 1,200 square feet for the Makerspaces. I'm hitting the wrong button here, just a second. There, oops.
And John,
There
can I
we
just
go.
interrupt? OTL stands for Office of Teaching and Learning. Just want to make sure.
OTL, Office of Teaching and Learning, I'm sorry. And so the current vision for the Makerspaces is as stated on the screen. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jim, and I believe that we have a video coming up.
Okay, thank you, John. And what we'd like to do is tee up the video of Franklin. And it's just a short 5-minute video.
It's possibly, I think, the best high school experience I could have gotten because it really pushes you. Like, it doesn't just let you settle for whatever. Like, it's a school that brings you in and says, if you really want to try and do something with your education, here's your chance.
We have lots of classes. We have multiple art classes, which is very nice. And the electives. The electives are my favorite.
The best part about Franklin is just the sense of community. Like, I came in here with one friend, and my idea was I'm just gonna play football, get my grades, get a scholarship, and just leave. But within like a couple of weeks, I made some friends. By like halfway through the year, I had like a family.
It's really sort of beautiful when a building and a site tell a story, and this building and Franklin High School has told an amazing story for the past 100 years, and we feel incredibly fortunate to help begin to craft that story for the next 100 years.
The whole idea of the openness of the building and the welcomingness of the building, and for people to walk into this new facility and to be able to see the teachers doing the great things that they do, to see the kids engaged and enjoying their education. That's what's really exciting, is that we're honoring what has been, but we're showing people what can be.
One of the things that's really great about these projects is it engages the community in really sort of meaningful conversations about what they want from their community and for their community.
Being a student voice was really cool because we got to talk to different kinds of students and see like what is actually important to you and what do you not care about. We did a workshop where you got different like little pieces of a room and you designed the entire inside of the building, and it was like, I think the one that we made was relatively close.
And I remember like they all ended up at our table and they were like, wow, and we were like, yep.
Yeah, because it made sense because we're the students, we're the ones who are in the building.
They were listening to what our community wanted and to what people wanted to have in this new building. And they would discuss it and tell them what was probable, what wasn't. So they'd go back, sketch it, bring it back for a next meeting. And they really tried to accommodate people. And I really feel they did. I think they did a beautiful job.
One of the key features of the site design actually is to turn the field 90 degrees. What that also allowed us to do is to locate the athletics and biomedical facility directly adjacent to the fields.
I like the Arts Center on the corner. I like the way in which it will welcome people into the school from that direction.
It really is kind of that beacon to the community that speaks to both the fine and performing arts, that starts to act as the portal for the community to come into the school. That's actually one of the pieces that I think I'm most excited about. We're actually keeping the shell of the space, including all of the interior detailing, and converting it into essentially a 2-story media center library space. Still keeping the proscenium opening. We have a law constitution classroom and a digital media and journalism classroom that will occupy those spaces to kind of still put that work on display.
We're building an environment that will make a day at school a pleasure. And to have that, that kind of energy, that kind of happiness, that kind of daylight in your daily experience, I think it's going to make a remarkable difference.
And I think the new school, like the whole school's door is open. Like kids are just going to be coming in there knowing that they're going to step in and find someone who can help them with what they need. And I think that's just such a good message to get across.
It's extremely exciting when you know you've got one of the best staffs in the world, and then to turn around and give them all the tools they need, and then to know that you've got the best kids in the world, and to see those teachers and kids put it together and how far they're going to go. That's what's exciting.
And if a community of educators, a community of students, of parents can walk in and say, this is what we talked about, this is better than what we talked about, then we know we got it right.
It will finally have like the resources to back all the amazing things it can do. And with like what we have now, like what little we have now, we're already doing so much. I can hardly imagine what we can do with more.
We're not even started building, but I already feel gratified in knowing that we have gotten past like so many steps, and we only have a few more to go, and they're going to be some of the hardest, but they're also going to be really, really rewarding.
Okay, at this time, I'd like to entertain any questions that the board may have.
Thanks so much. Questions, comments?
That's a great video.
Director Morton.
Yeah, a couple of quick comments. One is in the photos of the Makerspace, and I appreciate that because it puts some, I was going to say put some parameters around things, but in fact it actually expands those quite a bit and what that means, and what it possibly can mean. So one of the things that I noticed the most about, which is exciting, is the light. And the use of natural light in space, and how important that is, and how there wasn't necessarily the same understanding of the importance of that natural light in 1911 as perhaps we have right now. The second thing, and I think some of your comments began to address this in terms of education and training and professional development, but when I look at space, particularly Makerspace, I think about what it takes to deliver a curriculum, manage a class, manage the actual space that isn't a X feet by X feet box, and wonder how prepared our educators need to be as that new space is created. So, I don't know if this is a question for you all, or if it's a question for the superintendent or others, how we're going to prepare our faculty, our teachers, to actually provide the kind of education that's needed for these spaces.
Right. I teed this up a little bit because Office of Teaching and Learning is actually addressing these very issues, because we want this to be a success. We want wide usage, and we really want students to be inspired. And a lot of that is staff being inspired in the space as well. I was, for many years, a teacher. And so as I put this slideshow together, I couldn't help but wonder, how would I, as a former social studies teacher, and by the way, 2 of my former students are in this auditorium right now, I couldn't help but wonder, how as a social studies teacher would I use a makerspace? And the more I did this, the more I got pretty charged about, it would be really cool either, I'm not so sure the entire class, but sending groups down to a makerspace to actually construct a project that's parallel with something that we're studying in world cultures would be just a phenomenal experience. And so I would need to feel empowered to be able to do that. I would need to know what the equipment is. I'd need to know the usage of the equipment, what kinds of projects avail themselves to my discipline. And I just envision this sort of like cooking. Over time, we've assembled myriad ways to cook and cookbooks and recipes. We will do the same with projects in all disciplines in makerspaces. I just think the opportunity is, like you said earlier, Director Morton, is just wide open.
And we would be remiss if we didn't recognize we have a number of our educator leaders in the audience who have been very, very actively involved in collaborating with our teams in configuring these spaces and looking at all the possibilities. So we're really pleased. Office of School Performance, Office of Teaching and Learning, Office of College and Career Readiness, they've all been playing a very active role in this work, and it's been a great effort.
Others? Director Regan.
So there was one comment that was made that just keeps sticking in my mind, and I'm trying to wrap my head around it, which is that makerspaces won't be scheduled for actual classes. And that seems like a really broad statement to make at this point, and I'm having trouble getting my head around that. Why wouldn't we schedule actual classes in the makerspace?
We're looking at makerspaces like we look at computer labs or a library or media center. Certainly a class can be there, but I'm not denied access to a library because a course is in there all fourth period for the entire semester. So what we're trying to do is we're certainly going to have CTE space in our schools. And
Right.
we'll have dynamic courses in those spaces, but the makerspace itself, we want on a sign-up basis. Does that make
So you're
is that
looking at
more clear?
makerspace separate from CTE space, sort of.
Correct.
What you're saying is there'll be dedicated CTE classrooms, but the makerspace
Well,
in additional.
okay, so back to Churchill. If you think of Churchill, on each side of that space that we saw in the photograph,
There's classrooms.
were classrooms, and they
Right.
could be considered CTE, or think of a CTE classroom going on either side of it. And it might be that the CTE class, fully appropriate, that they sign up to use the space for part of the time. But what we're also saying is we want that space available to other disciplines throughout the entire day for the entire semester.
Dr. Buell.
So you're saying that the CTE class would have their own classroom?
Correct.
And then in their classroom, they'd have their CT, would they have the same CT materials in their classroom, machines and so forth?
Right, so Director Buell.
I mean, they would have them in their own classroom?
Right, so Franklin has a metal shop and a wood shop in the new design. And then there's 1,200 square feet adjacent to that would be the makerspace at the Franklin site. So the CTE courses would be in the other two spaces. That third independent makerspace would be on a sign-up basis.
What kind of CT courses are we envisioning in those classrooms that would have activities within those classrooms appropriate to the CTE, meaning that they have access to the machines and so forth? What would be an example of some CTE classrooms that would, or programs that would be in those classrooms that would then, how would you would then move into the makerspace for certain parts of your thing because they have more
Right.
materials? Are you balancing the materials and the, for lack of a better word, machinery? I mean, I'm having trouble getting my head around it too. I'm also having trouble getting around the makerspace social studies, being a social studies teacher.
Right.
Did you ever come up with anything that you thought would, how you could use the makerspace for your social studies stuff? Did you come up with give an example?
I did.
Yeah,
Would you
what
like
did you
an
come up with?
example?
Anything?
Yeah,
Anything good?
Let's let Mr. Wilhelmi answer. How about that?
So let me read you this. Sorry. So one of the photographs that we showed you was High-Tech High International School in San Diego. So consider a recent 9th grade assignment on the rise and fall of populations. Humanities teachers Mike Strong and physics and engineering teacher Scott Swaley told their group of 50 freshmen to build a 6-foot diameter geared wheel out of wood and come up with a theory about why and how civilizations rise and fall based on their readings and research on the Mayans, Romans, and Greeks. Why and how civilizations rise and fall based on the readings of the Mayans, the Romans, and the Greeks. And so their project was to come up with this wheel, and they built it in their shop space at High-Tech High.
So the Makerspace would have the materials in there and the machinery to do
Right,
that?
machinery and materials, correct.
Any other questions or comments? All right, thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Look
Thank
forward
you.
to future
Really cool.
updates as we go. It's very exciting.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Yay. All right, so at our January 27th meeting, the board voted to approve amendment number 2 to the 2014-15 budget. As part of that approval, we asked the superintendent to develop a plan for additional investment to improve outcomes for our students. So I'd like to ask Superintendent Smith to introduce this item.
I will, and I'm going to wait for just a second to get teed up. You guys received materials over the weekend, and the PowerPoint is really more for me to be able to tell the story to the audience of the detail you have in your packets. And as Director, yeah, I have the clicker. Yep. And as Director Adkins just said, I'm going to do a bit of a background. At two board meetings ago, or you approved amendment number 2 to the 2014-15 budget. Back in September, when we reviewed the beginning fund balance, we added school staff. We did spending plans in support of the 3 priorities, so 3rd grade reading, reducing exclusionary discipline and reducing the disproportionality in exclusionary discipline, and increasing our graduation rate. We also made some one-time investments, and there was a lot of discussion on the board about what level of unassigned contingency you felt comfortable with, and at that point it was you wanted to retain an unassigned contingency of 4.5%. And I bring you back to that because that's the moment you established that's the level that you felt comfortable with. Earlier this month, when we did our fall balancing, we reviewed that we had higher local option revenue, we had lower expenditures, and it increased our unassigned contingency to 7%. At that point, the board directed me to come back with optional spending plans to address immediate needs in our schools, with the idea that you were still comfortable with holding 4.5% in reserve. And that was the charge. And with also the idea that you wanted a survey of school-based staff to understand what they considered to be immediate need. So that was the charge. And then along with a number of ideas that board members had about what those potential investments could be. The survey, and we surveyed roughly 5,000 people. We had a 40% response rate, which is really amazing on that short turnaround. Yep. The 3 highest rated things identified by our school-based staff: technology upgrades, and we had a number of different categories of technology upgrades, school safety improvements, and increasing schools' discretionary budgets. We also had summer programming, library books, and musical instruments, and we continued. Professional development was one of the ones that was listed, and actually a pretty narrow range between all of the ones that people identified. And then we had a long list of, like, in my dream world, these are the other things I'd want. The things we did not do, so we had people made suggestions for things that were ongoing expenses, like increasing in staff. We specifically did not do those. Those would be things we'll consider as part of the next year's budget. So we were looking for one-time investments in this particular survey. Okay, so I'm going to walk you through 2 different spending plans and then show you the relationship to contingency, and then I'll leave you on a slide that shows you both and just you're kind of evaluating the level of spending and the level of contingency that you feel comfortable with. So spending plan A had us investing $4.2 million in technology support for teachers and students, $770,000 in school safety improvements, $750,000 in credit recovery and summer school for students for this summer. And I'm going to remind you that we did this past year, where we supported high schools identifying students who are close to graduating that would benefit from us being able to say, we'll support you doing your summer school credit recovery. And we had a number of students who were able to graduate this year specifically because of that investment, so a good one. 1.3 in library books, musical instruments, and PE equipment. And specifically in the library books, we were looking at both weeding and culling, and then investing in cultural specific collections. Musical instruments in, and hang on, I'm going to tell you the number of schools because it's 49 schools. A number of training and professional development opportunities that include AVID training, and I'm going to say AVID in our middle schools. We have AVID currently in 2 of our middle schools. This would add it to all of our middle schools. And we have AVID in 3 high schools. It would add another 3 high schools. And it would allow us to leverage private investments from 2 private investors who would support the training. So this is a whole package that lets us expand what's been a successful practice. It also adds a dyslexia training for elementary school teachers that during the summer, and beyond diversity training for new teachers who have been on the waiting list, and that we could offer it to during the summer. And then finally, the last item here is a significant one. It's $3.7 million that would be earmarked over the next 3 years to specifically add intensive staff support in our focus and priority schools. So this recommendation adds a teacher and an educational assistant in 4 focus and priority schools this year, and 5 additional focus and priority schools in year 2, and then all of them in year 3. That would add support additional just intensive work on early literacy, but it's staff added to the schools in order to get them out of focus and priority status. So that's what the last one is for. So the total used in this particular spending plan, $12.1 million, which leaves you with 4.5% still held in reserves, okay? And I'm going to walk you through all of this before we do questions, just so you get the whole framework that we're looking at here.
We just have to clarify the question. You want me to wait?
If you want to open the door for that, great. I'm just thinking, let me get all the way through and then let's do it. Yeah.
Let's just do it.
Spending Plan B is still the technology support for teachers and students, although at a little lower level. So you see we've cut that back a bit. The school safety improvements at $770,000, credit recovery in summer school, the library books, musical instruments and PE equipment, training and professional development, same package. The Cte expansion, oops, I don't think I did that one. So the Cte expansion also is cut in half on Plan 2. Cte expansion is high school specific. It's in allowing high schools to continue. Last year we added a staff person and $40,000 per high school to invest in equipment to be building another program of study. This would be a continued investment in high schools being able to build their CTE offerings, which could be used for equipment, it could be used for training. We've had schools like Madison that did Project Lead the Way, which is a training for a curriculum and being part of a national curriculum, but you send your teacher for 2 weeks of intensive training where they literally go through the whole program in 2 weeks over the summer, but it's very lab intensive, equipment intensive. It would allow, it could potentially allow a school to do that. Anyway, numbers, the different high schools would have discretion over how they used it. Total on spending Plan B, $7.2 million, which would leave you 5.5% in contingency. So those are your two levels of potential investment. The risks that you know, but the ones that you would be holding contingency to potentially mitigate. The first one would be the risk of the not reaching the current service level budget in the state budgeting process, which we've identified as $7.5 billion for the biennium. The state, the co-chair's budget right at this point is $7.235 billion. If in fact we do not move beyond that gap, so the potential gap there, $10.4 million, we're including the cost of full day K, and if the kicker kicks, as being part of that same risk factor. So we didn't add in new dollar amounts, but any one of those things could be a part of why we don't get to the $7.5 billion. And in which case we would want to still offer full day K, so we wouldn't want to be in the position we can't do full day K. And we'd want to hold current service levels, so you'd want to be able to mitigate. The second potential risk is the 13-14 state school fund reconciliation, so looking backwards where they'll reconcile for property taxes actually collected, and our estimate of what our dollar amount could be there is $3.5 million. So your total risk factors, of which all may happen, of which none may happen. So again, you're trying to weigh what's your sweet spot of investment now and what do you hold for contingency, but the total there is 13.9, okay? So if you do a little summary to help you think about this, all of your green boxes there would be spending plan A, so it gives you your technology, your school safety, credit recovery, summer school, library, instruments, PE, professional development, Cte Expansion, and the focus and priority school investment. And then you go on over into the uncommitted, unassigned contingency column, and you see it also includes holding 4.5 in reserve. Your other plan would be the blue boxes, which lists all your investments there in spending plan B, and then you go left over into that lets you hold 5.5 in reserve. Now the critical factors here, if in fact you have to go on spending plan A, you are then mitigating for that full menu of risk factors. And unfortunately, that's hard to read the black there, but it takes you down to 1.8% left in reserve once you've mitigated for those risk factors, which is below what your goal is. So it's the 3% is the board's goal for what you hold in reserve. This is what you hold a reserve for. So you would need to test your own willingness to, if in fact we invest that deeply right now, are you also going to feel comfortable taking us down to 1.8 in reserve? Spending plan B has you investing all the blue squares and then going down into the whatever color that is, maroony, light maroon, whatever it is. But it would take you down to 2.7 in reserve. If you invested, if you held yourself at the 5.5 and then all those factors actually occurred, you'd be down at the 2.7. So your conversation tonight is largely identifying where's your comfort zone of immediate. I think we got great feedback from teachers and principals and school staff, and we did do all school-based staff in terms of what people felt were priorities. And I think you've got some good potential spending plans, and you're really identifying what's your comfort level of what happens right now.
Great.
So,
thank you so much.
over to you.
Okay, so before we get into our questions and discussions, when I get this on the table, first we need to ask Ms. Houston, is there any public comment on the resolution related to this?
I have one, Margie Brown.
Okay, great, welcome, come on down. Margie, I know you've been here before, so I don't need to repeat the guidelines. Thanks so much for being here, and as always for sitting through every single meeting. All those who do that are very welcome.
Okay. Co-chairs Adkinson Knowles and Superintendent Smith and board members, I was interested to see what your choices are. And so you have to recognize I wrote this before I saw what the plan was, but I think it still pertains. With the opportunity for additional resources to support Portland Public Schools, there are many good ideas on how to spend those dollars. This past year, you were able to add significant number of teachers, and I hope you can continue to increase teaching staff and their support in order to lower class sizes. My concern is that the stable state funding is not yet guaranteed, and there is still the possibility of the kicker kicking. Additional funding may come with some strings attached as well. It would be wise to put the kicker receipts in a rainy day fund, and I hope you will maintain a sufficient contingency fund for our district. I appreciate that the superintendent's plan for additional expenditures is focused on improved outcomes for students. I hope you will consider keeping to limited, significant one-time expenditures that will not impact future budget choices. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, so the board will now consider Resolution 5018, plans for additional expenditures in the 2014-15 budget for School District Number 1J, Multnomah County, Oregon. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Director Regan moves, and second?
Second.
And Director Morton seconds the motion to adopt resolution number 5018. Any board discussion on this resolution?
Can I add one more detail?
Yes, ma'am.
before? So one of the things that was listed that board members suggested and that got response from school-based staff was adding to the consolidated budgets or the discretionary funds of each school. That also came as a recommendation from the workload committee, and they gave us a allocation methodology that we're still working on, but it's been approved that we would actually increase, that's like a $300,000 amount that would go to increasing consolidated budgets for individual schools.
So clarifying, would that be part of your spending plan?
It's
either
not
way?
part of this because we had it over, because it came through the workload committee, so.
Okay.
By this proposal, so like you could amend that, but that's what this proposal is. I just wanted you to know that it was also, got surfaced.
So are we adding 300,000 to each one of these?
It was coming out of the $1 million already allocated, that the
Gotcha.
workload committee makes recommendations to, and that we then are approving, and that just to say approved.
Great.
So,
Okay. So Director Curler.
Yes, clarifying question.
Yeah.
Which is, when I look at the resolution, essentially what we're doing tonight is figuring out what contingency that the board is.
Exactly.
And, yeah, and we'll have a lot of questions, I'm sure, about the potential spending plans, but they're potential, we're not voting on them tonight.
Yeah, I think, thank you for that clarification, Dr. Curler. I should have said up front, we are, you said it exactly right. We are voting tonight on the contingency level, and then the superintendent, this is her plan that she's presented to us, but she is going to go forth and implement that. So I'm sure she'll be glad to hear various, people have different thoughts or opinions, but really, we're going to direct her with this, how much to spend, and she is going to go forth and make the decision of how specifically to spend it. That's my understanding.
Okay. I'm telling you the plan right here. What you asked me to do is come back with a plan.
Right.
And we actually had this conversation because I asked this question of, was I bringing you back a plan, and then were we waiting to vote on it, or did you want to vote on it at the same moment? And what I got at the last meeting was you wanted to be able to do it immediately so you could release funds immediately into schools. But so that was how we came back with it, but clearly.
Right. So again, the decision before us is on the resolution and the wording of the resolution in terms of the 4.5 versus 5.5.
Exactly.
Okay, that's my part.
And again, if board members have other suggestions they want to share with the superintendent, that's great, in addition to the feedback she's gotten. But that's not what we're looking for. Okay. Director Knowles.
Now the clarifying question.
Yes.
Carol, I'm looking at the K-3 literacy RTI support for focus schools and charter schools,
Yes.
the 3.7 million. And my question for that is that all in this year between now and June or July?
It would be earmarking that total amount to be spent over 3 years. So it basically encumbers it now, since we have it as a block amount, but it says what we're going to do is we're going to provide a wholly different level. So our focus and priority schools have gotten different levels of investment from the state that's declined as time has gone on. This allows us to give a level of intensity that we're essentially saying these schools need to get out of focus and priority status with the focus on early literacy. But it's putting instructional support at the school and EAs, and earmarking it to be spent over 3 years.
Well, so my question in that is, or a question to go along with that is, how much would we actually be spending in this year? And isn't the balance of that something that we should have a discussion about, or at least we could agree that we're going to do this, but that money comes out of the next budget, not out of this money? Well, that's my question.
So the proposal is, yes, you could reduce, so we have in this one, picking 4 schools that we do between here and the end of this year, and then building it up to the full number of schools next year. So you could decide to do it end of this year and just next year and reduce that amount. What we're basically proposing is encumbering it now as an ongoing expense that you now are restricting the dollars.
So pre-committing.
Yeah, I get it.
Pre-committing it, yeah.
Okay.
But, so yes, but could you structure it in the way you're suggesting? Yes, you could.
Or alternatively, we could not do this now, but have this as sort of a placeholder for discussion in the budget
In the coming budget,
discussion.
yes, you could.
Except that if you did that, you wouldn't do the 4 schools right now.
Then we wouldn't do the 4 schools right now.
So how
But
much
you
would
could
it cost
just,
to do the 4 schools right now?
Director Wine, could you come up and do that? David
Just
Wine,
curious. I'm not trying to.
Assistant CFO.
I'm just curious.
Yeah, he's
So,
got this calculated.
The cost to do what we were talking about for this year is $400,000. And then the remaining money was the cost to keep that going next year and the year after, and to add additional schools next year and the year thereafter.
Okay. Thank you. Other questions, comments? Director Regan?
So just to quickly follow up on that, my concern on that line item is that what we really wanted to be looking at is one-time funding, and this clearly isn't. And if my colleagues are interested in having more of a reserve than 4.5, I'm not sure why we would want to have those funds encumbered. So I'm generally I love the idea of us providing more support, but what our goal was to be using one-time funds, and so I'm a little bit concerned with that one. I wanted to ask a question about the consolidated budgets, because first of all, I'm just so thrilled that our staff responded in such a big way to this, and I think that's a great message for us to go out and do those kind of questions in the future. And it would also be fun at some point to be able to do that with students and ask them, because it would be interesting to see where they come out on some of these versus others. But one of the areas certainly that we heard, great support for was principals' consolidated budgets and increasing that. So the $300,000 or so, I believe, is what we're talking about from the Teacher Workload Committee. Is that the amount?
Correct. It was $300,000 for the work from the Workload Committee.
I'm trying to understand what that means on a per principal or per school level. Generally speaking, is that a 10% increase in their current consolidated budget? Is it a 50% increase? Is it a nothing?
I'm going to let David come on up and answer this one.
Can you
Because
just
we've been
kinda
working
give us
on the,
give us a sense of what that
We've been working
means?
on how would we, how do you do this as an allocation methodology? Go ahead.
So it's a 6.5% increase over the base funding in consolidated budgets this year, which at a small K-5 school, that increase is about $2,000, and at a large high school, it's about $11,000.
So my question would be, is that meaningful to a principal? Because it doesn't feel like that's very much money, and when we got this kind of a response.
There were 3 principals on the workload committee who, when the email went out proposing this, were very excited.
That's 3.
And actually,
no, I mean, maybe that's wonderful.
Could I do a piggyback on that, maybe just in terms of the context of what the total amount is in general, as well as, are we sure that, my understanding is there might be some variability in terms of what gets spent down
And I was going to say,
each
yes,
year.
spending plan and spending patterns.
Right, so the total amount, the total base funding for schools' consolidated budgets this year is about $4.5 million, spread across all of the schools. And so the smallest schools get about 30,000 and the largest schools get about 160,000. 2/3 of the schools do not spend every single dollar and carry over money into the following year. Now, some of them get pretty close and don't carry over a huge amount, and some of them intentionally save the money for a specific project, so they will not spend money one year because they need a certain larger amount for a particular project. So it does vary across schools in terms of how much of that money they spend.
So it seemed there would be a little bit of a challenge then in terms of providing more, whether it's across the board, whether or not you've already used it, or based on some other formula?
So here's this one, no matter what amount of money we put in, people are going to be excited about it.
Yeah.
And
right.
it carries
Yeah.
over. So, and I'm also getting, there was another proposal or hope that the workload committee would do this investment and that we would match it. I didn't understand this hope at the point we were putting together the proposal, but I'm understanding the hope now by looking in my audience. There was a hope.
That's
Yeah,
actually
but-
where I was sort of going with
Yeah, well,
it.
and it could be, like, is that still an option? Like, yes, and the dollars would carry over. So like if it's in the consolidated budget, it's the thing that gives a building discretion to do stuff.
Right.
Exactly.
And it lets you pay extended responsibility for something, or, you know,
Right.
buy your teachers time to have planning and collaborating. I mean, it
So
lets
it's
you
not-
do things that have discretion, so.
It's not
yeah.
use it or lose it, and.
It's not lose it or lose it. So you can use it,
So what
it's
I
a-
was
it's a good
hearing
place to
though,
invest.
the 300,000 could come out of the $1 million that we allocated.
So here's what I'll say. At the point we were putting this plan together, my understanding was we had the proposal coming forward from the workload committee, and that's where that one was handling, so it went off of this list. The hope that I'm getting is
Yes.
that we would do the workload committee investment and that we would also match it out of this pot. So like
Good. Shuffle
any
it.
of those, like there's
Moving pieces.
and
makes
any
me
amount we
happier.
put here will
Okay.
be like really utilized and felt in,
Oh, yeah.
in terms of school life. It changes what you have
Absolutely.
control over, so, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, Dr. Regan, did you have?
Oh, I have a bunch more, but go ahead.
Okay. All right, Dr. Curley.
Well, David is there. So these numbers here, when we spend down and we have, the worst case scenarios happen and we're at 1.8 or, I can't even do it.
It is 1.9 now.
Yeah. But we're at the worst. That assumes that we wouldn't be finding any other revenue. So this last year we found 28, close to 30 million. So does that assume that we wouldn't be having anything above any revenue? It is. Let me phrase it differently. Is it assuming that the worst case scenarios happen in terms of shortfalls, but that no up case scenarios happen in terms of increased revenue?
That is correct.
Okay.
Director Buell, I think you had your hand up earlier. Did you have a comment, question?
I have a Facebook page that's entitled Steve Buell, Portland School Board Member. I think I'm going to go home and change it to be titled The Old Fool. Once again, we've done something exactly opposite of what I assumed we were going to do, which was to sit down and figure out, come in with suggestions of money to spend, and we were going to choose between those suggestions. So obviously that's not the case, so I have some questions on the things that we have in the list.
Okay, what are your questions?
The technology bundles that are now out of date that we bought in 2010 to 2012, those are out of date now, and what, in a year, 2 years?
I'm gonna
What
let
are
our-
we talking about in those
I'm gonna ask
technology?
Josh Klein,
I know
who's
and
our Director
it
of
says,
Technology, to come on up.
It says, for students, and I mean, it makes a lot, are we buying,
So I'm sorry, Director Buell, are you referring to which chart or which
I'm
description are you
referring to the technology bundles. I'm working off the comments from the superintendent on this page.
Oh, okay, in her memo.
On the memo, yeah.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
And Josh, do you
I
need
like that
one of
'cause
these little charts?
Kind of said,
I know what he's referring to.
do these also include more mobile computer labs, so to speak?
So that's Josh Klein, Chief Information Officer. The technology bundle proposal for $2.9 million is to replace presentation stations, basically, that teachers use in their classrooms. And that equipment is out of date and needs to be replaced at those 34 sites.
So that's the 2010, 2012 equipment is now out of date? What
Yeah,
does it mean to
it's-
be out of date? Are they broken down? You can't use them? They don't go on the internet anymore? What is that? I don't know what that
So
means.
it's a projector and a document camera and a cart and a set of speakers,
Mhm.
effectively. And then some of those have a computer on them as well. And the expected life of those systems is about 4 to 5 years.
So are they breaking, how many of them, what percentage of them are broken down now that we haven't replaced? Is there a fairly large percentage of them, or what?
I would say it's a fairly large percentage. I don't have an exact, percentage to give you at this point.
Are we buying ones for teachers? Would this include ones for teachers that don't have any now? Do we still have teachers that don't have any?
So that's a really good question. So the tech bundles that we rolled out during that time frame in 2010 went out to about 34 schools, and then we waited several years because we didn't have the budget to roll out to the rest of the schools. Those tech bundles are going out this year, right now, to the rest of the schools, and this proposal would have us going back and refreshing those old bundles, so at the end of next school year, basically everybody would have a brand new bundle, every classroom.
What is it that needs to be refreshed with them? I'm still kind of lost on that.
So projectors break down.
Okay.
The bulbs don't last particularly long. Oftentimes, it's almost as expensive to replace the bulb, to replace the projector as it is to replace the bulb. Document cameras break. The parts just they're just not made to last, forever. And so the equipment does break down, it gets damaged, and it needs to be replaced.
And we came up to this number by doing a survey throughout our schools?
No, this number was generated based on the cost of replacing the cards at those sites, replacing the tech bundles at those locations. The cost
Even
per
if they're not broken?
Correct. And then the tech bundles that we reclaim from those sites, we would refurbish and repurpose for other uses.
I'm not trying to be rude here, but I'm still having trouble. If I've got a tech bundle and it's working, and it's got a camera, basically the tech bundles, my understanding is you have a computer that you can pull things up and you can then put them through on the document camera up on the screen for kids to see. That's the tech bundle. Is there some other portion of that I'm missing?
No.
So if mine's not broken and it's working along, we're gonna take it back and give you a new one. Give me a new one anyway.
So I mean, we could probably have a pretty lengthy discussion about, the best way to maintain the technology, but in my opinion, it's better to keep all of the technology to the extent possible updated all at one time and have it all standardized and the same, and we are much more able to support that. If we go in and we're having to investigate every single classroom to determine what needs to be replaced in that classroom, that's a monumental effort to visit every classroom and evaluate the condition of the equipment. And then we also end up with different ages of equipment in different places. So the approach here is to replace all that equipment, bring everything back, throw away what's bad, keep what's usable, and then repurpose that over time.
And what do we do with the repurposing? Because that won't be up to date with the new stuff. The
Right, I mean-
repurposing one, do we sell it or do we put that back out and you got a repurposed one instead of the new one that you got? If everybody has a new one, what will we do with the repurposing ones?
So the stock that we would maintain of refurbished equipment could be used as newer equipment breaks down. So over the next 5-year expected lifespan of that equipment, as things break down prematurely, we can come put that refurbished equipment into those classrooms. We can also put it into new spaces as we open up new classrooms. If we don't put a new tech bundle into those rooms, we can use refurbished equipment there. There's a variety of things we can do with it.
Thank you very much for you taking the time.
Great. Other questions?
Well,
Director Curley?
just on the technology, I want to make a comment, which is we really need it. In a big way. That was evidenced in survey of the teachers and the principals. And I see it in my kids' schools. So it is a real big.
Yeah, and it's standard practice in large organizations, exactly how you're managing it, so I appreciate that. Director Curley, yeah.
Sure. So there's a couple things that I was hoping that would be up here that's not up here, so I just wanted to ask about. One is the summer program is related to high school, but then there's this whole other, I'm thinking of something like the PDX summer school that we received a letter from Tim. But there's a whole set of programs that are geared toward younger kids. Just did that get overlooked, or is it, we're, in your mind, we're fine with it and we'll get funded in the next budget? Are there things that we can do now that would help this next summer?
So no, we're not fine with it. So we could be doing a whole lot more summer programming than we currently do across the entire age span. And what we prioritized for this purpose was high school and getting kids to graduation. So we did not do, we could do the whole budget, this entire thing of saying what we'd like to do with it is just fund summer programming for kids across K-12 and have really robust stuff that we can do. And we've got programming that we're doing in some sites and stuff that we're doing with partners, but it's very, it's scattered, it's patched together. So, and we do our best to patch together things that kids need to get them the support they need, particularly key transition points, but it's very patched together. It's something we'd love to continue to build. And in this list, I prioritized high school. Yeah. So, but you could, again, spend this entire dollar amount and just do summer programming.
Or in any one of
and
these.
still not hit what you want to be able to hit in terms of numbers of kids who need it. Yeah. This is also where we rely on some of our partnership with Sun and Parks and.
Right. Other folks we haven't heard from yet? Any comments, questions? Yeah, maybe Director Bly.
I just want to say thanks for the list. It helped kind of assemble it in my mind. I still, with all those unknowns, and I don't believe all those unknowns will, I don't believe we'll find ourselves at the worst case scenario. No. At the same time, I don't believe, there are certain things I believe will happen that will be part of that worst case scenario. And so I guess I'm landing at a comfort level at 5.5. Mm-hmm. That feels both operational, that feels both that it meets our aspirational goal and still would keep us pretty close to board policy of 3% if worst case scenarios happened. I found myself similar to Director Regan saying I don't want to invest just because of the encumbrance on anything other than one-time funding. At the same time, if there is a way for us to hold back some of this reserves and be really thoughtful to support focus and priority schools, that actually pulled me up. That said, for that priority, rather than this mad scramble of let's hurry up and spend $12 million in the next 6 months or 4 months, let's be intentional with what we're doing and spending it on. So I offer that as a possibility or as something that I'd be willing to, but again, I would trust your and staff's judgment about how that goes rather than saying, I'm going to take this piece but not that piece and this piece and that piece. So I'll just.
So that's actually super helpful, I think, for just kind of moving toward resolution of this discussion. So I'm hearing from Director Belial a comfort of 5.5 versus the 4.5 that's in the current version of the resolution. I'll just say I'm there as well for some of the same reasons. So I don't know if other folks, if we get a sense of, Director Knowles.
So I think I talked about this last week, but I'm also at 5.5 for almost exactly the same reasons that Greg mentioned. I think we have to balance the uncertainty that we, or at least I feel, with our urgency. And I think that the superintendent has done a really great job of providing us with some examples of how she would spend this money, and I would not be opposed to tweaks with that, given what you're hearing from us. And I guess I am really concerned about the uncertainties because I'm not certain about the co-chair's budget. I'm not sure we'll get there, and even if we get to that, I'm not sure I'm not sure that'll be enough for us, because right now it's not. We're not quite there yet. And then I'm also very concerned about the kicker, and whether it kicks, that's $300 million, and the legislature's going to have to come up with that money someplace, and some of that will be with schools. And from what I'm hearing from people who are in Salem, they're thinking, yes, that it's going to kick, because our economy is continuing to grow. So those are the things that I'm most concerned about. I keep thinking back to those years when we were doing all those cuts and all our programs being decimated and so many teachers being lost and all those horrible things that happened when we were having to make all those cuts, and I would like to minimize the amount of cuts we would have to make the next time around if in fact all of these terrible things happen, which who knows, they may not. But then again, as Tom was talking, you asked David about what about the upside. Now, we were surprised last year by the upside. It would be wonderful to be surprised again this year, but that's another thing that we just don't know about, and I'm not going to rely on that for me. So that's why I'm at 5.5 as well. Actually, I'm at 7, but I'll go to 5.5.
Yeah. If these are the
compromises.
So I'm a little bit confused why we're having the whole discussion about 4.5 versus 5.5, because I thought last week we asked the superintendent to come back with a budget that reflected 4.5, and we, as far as I recall, voted on that. So I'm confused why we're having this discussion again. So I wanted to mention a couple of things, or have a couple of questions. One is musical instruments. When I look at providing 242 musical instruments at 49 schools, that comes out to something like 5 musical instruments per school. So I'm trying to understand how we got there, what that means,
Perfect.
what that will do for us, whether it will have any impact. Feel free. I have no idea.
Our Arts TOSA has been dying for this question, I'm just going to say. She's in the wings,
Well,
ready.
Talk to me about musical instruments and how we can get band programs started in middle school.
So can I just say,
Talk about all our arts
back in the fall, when we had the moment where we were getting to do some ads, the one person I got a full budget from, like immediately, our Arts TOSA. So go for it.
Yes, thank you for having me up here. I appreciate being here. So I want to talk to your question about the amount of instruments.
I'm sorry, could you tell us your name for the record?
I'm sorry, thank you so much. I've never been up here. Kristen Brayson, I'm the Arts TOSA.
Welcome.
Thank you. So within that amount, we have to look at the cost per instrument. The lowest instrument cost is a flute that's $362 per flute. A medium cost of instrument is a bass clarinet, that's $2,000. And then the high cost is a baritone sax at $4,360. Wow. So that adds up very quickly when you're looking at, say that again.
I said a lot of flute players, huh?
Welcome to Cleveland Public Schools, where we play flute.
Yes. So the schools that we're talking about, presently we have students that don't have instruments in their hands and in class. So we are trying to fill where our gaps are with this. And that's what the investment would be about at this point. Talking to Director Reagan, talking to your point about what we're going to do about an articulation, I'm going to be presenting March 3rd, and we'll really dive a little deeper into those details to try to figure out what that picture looks like for you guys.
Okay, I guess as I'm looking at one time, clearly for next year, we might be looking at adding music teachers. I mean, we've got the arts tax that's helping us K-5. We could be looking at the 612 articulation, which is what I assume you're talking about. But, obviously musical instruments are expensive, and it's one of the areas that, at some point we have to bite the bullet and make the investment if we're going to really attempt to offer our kids this. So I'm feeling like 242 instruments is pretty minuscule request in general. So moving on from there. Another question I wanted to ask is, I had sent a email to the board and to, I'm sorry, you want to talk music still?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was curious, is there a used market, and is that a viable option?
I couldn't hear you, I'm sorry.
Is there a used market for instruments, and is that a viable option?
It can be very tricky. Our music shop person, we have one for the entire district. And so their time is spent a lot of times on our stock right now is super old. and we're going to need to look at replenishing whether or not we tier that out over a couple of years. But trying to work on instruments that need replacement is sometimes takes more time than actually getting a brand new instrument that you're not going to have to spend all that labor cost on. So, you know, there's different ways to weigh out your investment options with that.
I mean, I'm a hack musician, but I've never bought a new instrument, and the ones I buy work great. So I just keep, because it is expensive, $4,000 for a sax. So I just,
yeah,
you might want to look into it.
Yeah, and certainly, you know, down the road as we're looking at stuff, we can look at those options too and provide you with some more data that would make sense for you.
So just to time check, colleagues, we're about 15 minutes over, so let's, other questions, comments?
So I was still wanting to ask another question. So I had sent a note to the board before the last board meeting again, asking about the notion of trying to give each of our juniors the opportunity to take the PCC math test, which is sort of the gateway course at PCC. We end up having something like 70–80% of students have to take remedial math when they go to PCC, where they have to pay for it themselves, and they don't get any credit for it. So as part of our effort to be college and career ready, I have asked whether or not we have an option of potentially offering that test to our juniors and then offering the PCC remedial math class the following year to, and you know what, as I'm asking this, I'm realizing this is really more of a budget question for next year.
Yes.
Yeah, I think
So
it
this
is.
isn't
I
a
think
question
it
for
is.
now.
Okay.
Thank you. I'm
But
gonna
that's
take
good
that
heads
one off
up
the
that
plate.
you
So Director
be
Morton.
prepared to talk about it.
Yes,
Yeah.
be prepared,
Yeah.
please.
Be prepared to talk
Yeah,
about
we are
it.
definitely
I'm gonna
moving
keep
into a
coming
whole
back.
budget process as soon as we get through this
Sorry,
piece.
thank you.
So, not tonight, but very soon. Director Morton.
Thank you. So, sort of looking through a lens of using our milestones, our achievement agreement as sort of the litmus test, and what are the things that are going to move the dial. And you know, at risk of sounding like a Luddite, technology isn't as big of a deal for me right now, except for support specifically around the Virtual Scholars program, which offers alternative to for students who may or may not be able to access curriculum in another form. If I were to still use that same litmus test, you know, I'm always a big fan of safety improvements. You know, I think our summer school and credit recovery is something we absolutely need to invest in. I love the, you know, Antonio's recommendation around, and in fact, when I made the comment last week, last week, I said, you know, let's not put a time limit on this. Let's figure out, you know, maybe there's a way to invest, and I didn't know what that was at the time, but to me, this literacy effort looks like a multi-year strategy to minimize, even if there was a school went off as a focused priority option, school lost some of that additional ODE resource, we would be able to maintain that, still continue to build that investment in those schools. So that looks like it's a way for us to create a deeper investment. And then, you know, those strategies that are particularly important to in reaching out and improving training of teachers in the areas of equity and diversity, and so those are the things that I'm looking, not to nitpick one or the other, but those are the things that mean the most, and I'm glad to see them in there. I think they're, you know, if I had a list of all my would like to's, it might add a couple of other things. Second to last item is I really appreciate looking at this this information and hearing
The survey.
thank you, and hearing back from so many different people, you know, overwhelmingly, it, you know, if I use my executive director hat, I think what programmatically can I do to move the dial and push achievement forward. If I'm looking at staff, you know, staff input, yeah, it's probably going to be about what's going to help me deliver something in the classroom. So I really appreciate that perspective. All in all, and given the information tonight, I would be leaning more towards something in the middle.
Can I ask a clarifying question, Director Morton? In terms of the 3.7 million that's in spending plan A,
Yeah.
I guess what I'm hearing, and from my perspective, that's more, because that would be an ongoing over 3 years.
Right.
I guess my preference, and I think Director Regan got at this as well, that, and when we move into our budgeting process, that would be on the table as part of the discussions versus having it be part of a one-time this spring spending.
Yeah,
that's where I'm at.
I
but
think
didn't
we
know.
could do that, but when you look at this as a one-time and the stability that this would create, I think it's an attractive option. And if we all pinky swear that we're going to be seriously considering that within the budget process, I would be much more inclined to say let's find another way to create that investment. But I do really like the stability that an investment like this would make over a multi-year period.
Mm-hmm. So moving toward actually voting on this resolution, I'll just say I was a no vote on going into this, and so I would still be a no vote on as currently written at 5.5%. To me,
4.5.
I would be a no vote on it as 5.5.
Either way?
Yeah. So I could, I could live with the 4.5 that is currently written. I would be a no vote. I appreciate all the work that's gone into it. I really appreciate the rapid turnaround on the staff input. But I, like Director Knowles, given that we, during the course of the year, got into a better financial position is a really good thing given all the uncertainties ahead. Last fall, we were in this school year. Right now, we're looking ahead to the future, the new biennium, and a lot of uncertainty. So, so that's where I'm at. Certainly excited about all this potential, and as Superintendent Smith said, we could each come up with lots of different spending plans and much, much, much more. It's not to say that all of these aren't really valuable and important pieces. So
can I ask for clarity on what you just did? So you're not supporting it if it's at 4.5?
no, I'm not supporting it as currently written.
At 4.5?
I'm sorry.
Okay,
I beg your pardon. I was saying it completely backward. You're
Yeah,
right.
okay.
Yeah, thank you. It sounded like you were, yeah.
Yeah, someone marked up my page here. Sorry. Sorry, completely addled.
Yeah, that's.
Yeah.
So what were you saying?
What I was trying to say was the spending down to 4.5%, I continue not to support.
Yeah.
Thank you for.
So I,
Go ahead. Director Buell?
I think Superintendent Smith was going to say something. I didn't want to interrupt her.
No, I said the thing I
Finally
needed
got
to
me
say. I was
straight.
going for clarity from Ruth about
Yes.
what she was working on.
Coherence, always a lofty goal for me. Okay.
Okay, go onward with my questions. Can you explain virtual scholars, exactly how that works? Because I don't understand it exactly how it works.
I can, good, I'm gonna ask Shay James, who is
It's
our
got
college and career
virtual
readiness.
scholars, summer scholars, and Portland evening scholar students who need 12 mobile computer labs. I don't know.
Shay and Antonio both, you guys can both come up and do these.
Well, I might be able to do part of it. Virtual Scholars is under multiple pathways, and so Antonio can speak to the equipment, and maybe I can speak to the programming questions.
Just very briefly, I would just want a quick answer, and maybe there could be additional follow-up as this plan
Perfect.
rolls out with details on what it's going to
We're
be.
going to vote tonight. How are they going to do?
We're voting on on what level of spending the superintendent's going to do.
This would have a lot of influence. All these
Well, we
questions
do need
are
to move on to
influential.
disproportionate discipline.
So what we're looking in, Antonio Lopez, Assistant Superintendent for the Office of School Performance. So what we're looking is looking for those options which provide students the opportunity to make up on credits if they're, for example, if they get an F, right? What are the ways in which the options that we can provide our students so they can make the credit as soon as possible? So there are some investments in terms of that we ask in terms of technology, because for some of them the Chromebooks will not work. They need an actual computer enabled to see the online if it is online. So there are some asks for technology to upgrade the capacity, and also how do we offer more to more students that need those types of credit makeups.
Don't they, what I can't understand is the need for a whole set for them. Don't they meet in a school? Doesn't that school have technology and so forth that they can use now? I mean, aren't the virtual scholars using technology in the school now? Why would they
Yes,
need new stuff?
and we want to make more available to them.
And currently, we have outdated technology in many of our schools, and we've been replacing with Chromebooks and operating systems that virtual scholars can't use. And so we do need the technology in order to be able to offer these services to students. And we're particularly, we'll be targeting for the first time with virtual scholars as well, seniors who are 6 to 10 credits behind. And so that will also be another component that we'll be
Thank
looking
you.
at.
Great.
Okay, next question.
I would like to wrap this up because we're now half an hour behind the agenda.
I have a couple questions, yeah.
Well, if you can make them very quick, please, because we do need to
I don't know
move on.
how quick the answer would be. I make questions quick.
Well, we're really we're not going into the detail on the superintendent's plan, because she can come back to us with further detail on that. What we need to decide upon tonight is the spending level that we're authorizing her and vote on this resolution.
Well, the spending level is contingent upon what we're buying with it. And I'm asking questions about what we're buying with it. Why wouldn't we allow that? I mean, are we back at speed chess again?
Why don't you quickly ask your question, and then Director Knowles also is
Okay,
waiting.
well, I'm about 4 or 5 more. Library books, we're talking about reflecting the cultural diversity of our students. What my concern is that does not become the singular. I mean, I think all of our librarians know to do that, but that's not where I would suggest that you want to spend all your library. Finding what you want is to get those good books that are new that we don't have in the libraries or set. So this is written in your comments like it was reflecting just that. See what it says there? It says, and I just wanted to make sure it wasn't really, it says, and update library collection in schools with books reflecting the cultural diversity of our students. But not all of the books necessarily are reflecting the culture that we're updating. Some of them would just be updating regular books that don't reflect any cultural thing that kids like to read.
Everything reflects cultural specificity of some sort, and so it's really looking at how do we have library collections that are going to appeal to all of our kids. So including like wide array of novels that are going to really appeal to all sorts of kids. So, I mean, it's really just saying update our collections.
And I think the
have stuff.
superintendent is acting in line with our racial educational equity policy, which is pretty clear on this. And again, I guess with respect, we're delegating to the superintendent the authority to carry this out. We're not micromanaging
And Steve, on this
her.
one, if you have some specific thoughts on it, contact me and give me the specific thoughts in terms of if you're wanting to look at specific things we purchase.
Director Knoll?
Okay. Should I just keep going here? You want to let somebody else ask? You can bring
I'd
somebody
like to
else
wrap this up and we
instead of
can
me.
vote and move on to disproportionate discipline.
Well, it would
which
be
is one of
nice.
our
I
priorities.
think it'd be nice, but you can have people vote to stop my questions, but you can't stop them yourself.
Then why don't you go ahead and ask your questions?
Okay. On the physical education equipment, does the National PE Teacher Association standards, why would we have that as a standard on PE equipment? Wouldn't we have what each building needs? Maybe they don't need something on the National PE Teacher Association standards, but they need more soccer balls? I don't understand how that works.
So I will ask our Office of Teaching and Learning to respond to you specifically about what that includes, what the standards include, and what the equipment is that they recommend to us. And we'll hold purchasing
we'll
that
go to
item.
the-
I'll
we'll go to
hold
the-
purchasing that item until I'm able
Okay,
to give you
we'll
the
go to
answer to
the-
that question.
Well, I
would
just
rather
was
you do that.
I was
I'd
more
rather you go
curious
ahead.
about why we would put that restriction in there instead of letting people get what they needed to get. Okay, going to K-3 literacy. I've got terrific problems here, I think, in that I'm of mind that we shouldn't do it over a 3-year period because I think it needs more thought than we have here. We've got support planning, professional development, progress monitoring, support differentiation of instruction and implementation of the RTI model. What I personally think what we need to do is be hiring teachers who work directly with children. And this isn't it, and it's a lot of money. And I think we need to, as a board, sit down and look through and see what we're doing here, as opposed to, there are some people in here, there's 4 focus schools, there are some people, but it's not even guaranteed that those people work directly with children. What I would think if we had 4 schools and we put people in, we would put in reading teachers who work directly with children, not somebody who was planning the RTI model here. I think we could do that in a different way, all right? That's my comment on that. So I really wouldn't support money at that, so that puts me down in the 4.5, is that right? Because that's on the other?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I started the bad pattern. It would put you at 5.5.
And same thing on the career technical education expansion. It's got support for curriculum development. And is that for actually developing curriculum for specific courses in specific schools? Or is that for more generalized?
It's giving an allocation to each high school, and it's for like whatever that high school needs to keep moving the building their CTE offerings. So it could include equipment, it could include curriculum development, could include professional development, like I described about Project Lead the Way, where you're actually taking a curriculum that's already basically developed, but it has lab-intensive kind of equipment that you need to purchase. So like it's really giving, we've had some schools that every school added a new strand of CTE this last year, and numbers of them have now identified additional equipment needs in order to fully offer it. So we're continuing to invest and allow them to keep crafting the CTE offerings that they've begun crafting. So. But it's the discretion of the school with that range of things possible to invest in.
And my last question?
Yep.
Thank you. And I'm not going to comment on the workload committee doing the consolidated budget stuff, but I have a lot of questions around that one too. The AVID training, why do we need, I mean, I like the dyslexia training stuff, of course, it's excellent. But the AVID training, I'm not sure how much money are we talking about for the AVID? Because you've got, the AVID just replaces other classes in your school. It's not on top of other classes in your school, it replaces something because they have a period for AVID, am I correct?
We have a period for AVID.
And so you have a period for AVID, so now you have AVID instead of where you had an elective normally. You wouldn't have it instead of
students opt to take it, yep.
Yeah, it takes the place of an elective. So I think we have a lot more work to do on AVID before we go nuts on it.
So here's what we
personally.
What we have done is we have so Madison's actually been doing AVID for a number of years.
Mm-hmm. And George does a lot of AVID.
And Cleveland and Roosevelt. And what we did this last year in the general fund was start building back into the feeder patterns for those high schools of teaching those study skills back in middle school and actually in elementary school. So we've been really doing, what you're building is a common language about how you study and a discipline, but it's a common language amongst the kids and the adults, and it's been highly successful. I mean, it's a highly successful national model. What we are proposing here is that we're building across all of our middle schools, and then 3 more of our high schools are ready to and want to add it.
And I see here it says funds pay for teacher time at summer training and site team meetings, tutors, family nights, and professional development.
Yeah, I'm just saying.
So what this would be for us is we've got other partners who would be paying for the actual training and for the library, building your AVID library. What we would be paying for is the time, because it's during the summer, so we'd be paying for teacher and staff time to go to the trainings. So.
I'm just saying, I think that the AVID, we need to take a look and see exactly if it's doing what we want to do. I don't have any question that it's a highly successful national model, but so is music. So is art. Art's a highly successful national, so are librarians. They are a highly successful national model backed up by research. So are all these other things that we are replacing by doing the Avid, possibly. I don't know. I just think I'd rather look at it, so.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you. Director Knowles.
Thank you. I'd like to propose an amendment to the resolution. Under the section on resolution, I would change in paragraph 1 the amount to 7.2 million. And in paragraph 2, the contingency at 5.5.
Okay, so a motion to amend Resolution 5018 is on the table to amend Resolve Number 1, change 12.125 to 7.2 million. Resolve Number 2, change 4.5% to 5%. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay, so Director Knowles moved and Director Belisle seconds the amendment. Any discussion on the amendment?
I would just reiterate the things that I already said, which is that I think that we're in a time of uncertainty. We're at the beginning of a biennium, not at the middle of a biennium. We're unsure where the legislature is moving. We don't know if the kicker's going to kick. I think the superintendent has put together a tremendous outline for us on where this money could be spent. And I think that 5.5 is a good place for us to be based on all the uncertainty that we have to face.
Thank you. Other discussion?
And let me also say, we're in the middle of a budget.
Yes.
We're in the middle of budgeting for the coming year. So we're really only talking about what we're doing for the next 4 months. So I really think that we need to keep it at 5.5, and if the legislature comes back and gives us all the money that we need, then there's always time for another conversation.
So Director Regan.
Yeah, I'm opposed, and I'm so confused why we're even having this discussion again, because a couple of weeks ago, we had this vote. We instructed the superintendent to come back and give us some budget ideas on how to spend some one-time funds and where we would land at 4.5%. Our board policy says our reserve should be at 3%. Our aspirational goal is 5%. I'm so glad that we're not talking about 7% now. We have urgent needs out in our classrooms today. So I don't understand why we're going past our aspirational goal. I understand that there are some uncertainties, but when I look at where we are today compared to the last 12 years that I've been on the board, we're in better shape than we've ever been in. And yes, there are uncertainties, and that's the reason you have a reserve, but I don't see any reason for us to go past our aspirational goals when we have such urgent needs in the classroom today. So I will be a no vote on the amendment.
Other comments on the amendment? Director Curler?
Sure. I mean, I guess I'd reiterate what Bobby said. It's just, we have voted on this. These unknowns were known to us when we first voted on it. They're still out there. This is, there's a whole upside that we're not taking into consideration. I do agree also with what Pam said earlier about tweaks. So I would vote for 4.5. I would like to see some tweaks, given our discussion. I'd like you to consider potentially the huge gap in the summer programs for the younger kids, if we could do something.
But just in terms of this amendment, your comment is that you would not support the amendment. Is that what it boils down to?
That's correct. I would move for 4.5.
Okay. Other comments on this amendment? I'll just add, for me, I would support this amendment, and again, given that we are now going into our budget process for this coming year, the contingency will be part of the discussion for that process going into this year, and over the next few months, as we have our town halls, we hear from the community, things become clear in the legislature, we'll have that money will still be on the table for consideration, very much so. But I don't want to tie us down at this very moment for short-term spending this spring, as valuable and as needed and as wonderful as all these proposals are, to get us down that low going in at this point in the year. So that's where I'm at, supporting the amendment. Director Buell, did you have something you wanted to say on the amendment?
No, I don't think so. I'm kind of supporting Matt's proposal, so I have an amendment after
Okay,
Voting on
so
this
first let's vote on the amendment that's currently on the table, if everyone has said what they want to say. Okay, all those in favor of the amendment, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
So that was 4, I think. All those opposed, please say no.
No.
Any abstentions? Okay, and student representative?
Aye.
Jaswal is voting yes. Okay, so that was, the amendment carries by a vote of 4 to 2 with Director Buell abstaining and student representative voting yes. Okay, so what we now have is 5018 as amended. Karen, do you have the amendments? Was that clear what the amendment was? Okay. All right. So now we're going to, are we ready to vote on Resolution 5018 as amended?
So, is this an opportunity to offer an amendment? Okay, so I would like to make an amendment that would increase the amount of money that we're spending by $300,000, which would match what the Teacher Workload Committee is putting into the consolidated budget, and that will give our principals some immediate flexibility out in the field.
Second.
Okay, is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay, so Bobby moves and Tom seconds an amendment to 5018 that would increase the amount spent by $300,000 to match the workload committee and give principals flexibility, et cetera. That's close enough?
Yes.
Okay, so there's been moved and seconded that amendment. Any discussion? Director Blau?
I just both appreciate the needs that are happening at the school, whether it's paper or any number of issues that our schools do. And I'm just using this opportunity while it's on the table to mention that as I get to work with districts throughout the county, I'm sometimes surprised at how much flexibility we give our principals. And so whether or not it's the most effective for us to let them have, for example, $160,000 at their discretion, it's something that I guess I'd be interested in considering and whether or not that's the best strategy for us to do.
Other comments? I'll just say, I mean, I appreciate the spirit behind this, but I think I would leave it to the superintendent. I'm hearing that there's sort of a separate conversation about this, and I think I would just prefer to keep, for me, I would prefer to keep it, the resolution as amended. And she's heard our input and thoughts on this and other topics, and she can go forth and work that out in partnership
Would
with our
it
team.
be possible to ask the superintendent if she's supportive of this amendment?
So, do you want the answer to that?
Sure.
Yeah. So yes, and here's what I would say, like, if it doesn't pass as the amendment, I'll look with how to do it within the spending plan too.
Yeah.
So just to say the spirit of the amendment, yes.
Yeah.
But
And I
yes.
guess for me, for me, it's we give our input on the different perspectives, and I want the superintendent to make the decisions, go out and implement it. That's for
But
me
yes,
the
the
appropriate
spirit
role
of
for
it,
us.
yes.
Yeah. Okay, so let's go ahead and vote on the second amendment to Resolution 5018. All those in favor, please indicate by saying yes.
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 So wait, 1, 2, 3, 4. All those opposed, please indicate by saying no. No. So that's 3. So the amendment carries by a vote of 4 to 3 with student representative voting
Yes.
yes. Okay, so now we have a resolution that's been amended to, so I guess, I'm sorry, Director Regan, didn't clarify. Did you mean to just increase the 7.2 million by another 300,000, or do you want a
Yes.
separate
Yes.
thing that's, okay. Do we need to put in the rest of the verbiage about what that is for, and where, if so, where would that go?
Well, instead of 7.2, it looks like it would be 7.5, right?
Right, and then whatever that corresponding percentage, we would now be at 5 something.
To be,
And I don't know if David Wine can calculate it that quickly.
I don't have the ability to calculate this second.
In your head, come on, David. Okay.
I'll figure it out. And
So,
let-
looking at our board council, are we okay with this? You have in clear the intent of what the amendment says. Okay, and did you need, I'm sorry, I should have asked this before we voted, but do you need to have the specific wording about what that additional money would be for, or everyone has
No, I
heard
think
it
it was-
more or
I've got
less?
it pretty
Okay,
clear. I've got
great,
it.
just checking. Okay, so now, are we ready to vote on Resolution 5018 as twice amended? Director Buell.
I have an amendment.
All right, what's your amendment?
I'd like to move that we take an extra $1 million, which is basically where we lost $3,700,000 in the support for focus and priority schools, and put it in one of two places, either people who work directly with children in focus and priority schools around reading, or in athletics, which engage children in after-school athletics and supporting what we're doing around the athletic work in the middle schools.
Okay, so if I understood you right, the
And
amendment.
let the superintendent do with it as she would like.
Okay, so amendment from Director Buell is to spend an additional $1 million above the 7.5 with the indication that it should be spent on people working directly with children in focus and priority schools on reading or athletics. Athletics at focus and priority schools?
No, just athletics.
Athletics in general, particularly in the middle schools, or just in
Middle schools.
athletics or athletics in middle schools?
Middle grades would be better because.
In
it's-
middle grades.
Oh, middle grades.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
So Director Curler seconds. Any discussion on this amendment? Director Blau?
I just, again, all the ideas that I hear, I actually, are good ideas, as were all the ideas that we saw in the list of input from various surveys. And really, we know that we are $2 billion of the state budget away from what's the quality education model, which is something that we'd want. And my concern with these amendment after amendment after amendment is that there's a lack of strategic thought behind what we're trying to do. It feels piecemeal, and this is a pattern that has happened before in the board, and I've seen it diminish. And so I'm concerned as it's rearing its tendency again. It's well within our authority to do. I don't question that. We can go line by line, $10 by $10. But this does not seem to be the wisest use of investment. In fact, it feels like we are trying to spend money fast and furious rather than focusing on trying to get the best outcomes for our kids.
And I just want to respond to that.
Director Curler,
okay.
you wanted to speak?
Sure, thank you. Because I think everything that we're doing and that we've talked about actually is strategic. And I think the most strategic thing that we can do is help our kids right now. Every time that an opportunity goes by that we can't help somebody to read, or every time that we miss an opportunity to engage somebody, we pay for it fivefold down the road. So it's highly strategic to spend resources that we have now on our kids now. So I just appreciate what you're saying, but I just really disagree with it.
Director Null?
I'm going to be a no on the amendment, mainly because it's not that I don't appreciate our sports programs and want them to be stronger, and literacy, but my understanding is that most of the literacy money that was in their proposal is money in the out years, about $400,000 in the in years, and my hope is that as you're adjusting these, you're going to find, and we will find within the budget this coming year, this $400,000, and then the next year, however much we need in each following year.
So part of the
to do that.
complexity of these is when we're adding people for 4 months,
Right.
but we're
Right.
not, we can't say we want you then also going on into next year.
Right.
Finding the people we need with the skill set we need to work with somebody for 4, so like I wouldn't, out of the $3.2 million, take the $400,000 and just fund it right now for 4 months, from here to the end of the
Right,
year,
right.
because I can't tell that person, I need you for 3 years
Right.
to dive in and go deep. So even, anyway, so just, that's the complexity of.
We don't tell any of our employees
No,
we
but
want them for 3 years.
We
don't.
No, but you do that.
But not
You
for
know what
3
I'm
months,
saying.
for
We
sure, not
don't
for
say
3
this is a
months.
4-month job, but
Yeah.
we want somebody who's highly talented and can
Yeah.
teach reading, and I only want you for 4
Right.
months.
Yeah.
That's a
And
complexity.
at the same time, we've all, as I think it was said, pinky sweared, that we all.
You like the
That we all
strategy.
are very supportive of the strategy and that we
Right.
want
In
to
the
see
ra-
it funded
in the
in
budget. Yeah,
so,
agreed.
I'm just concerned about, as Chair Adkins has has stated just these one-offs coming through. And I liked the proposal that you put forward for all of us, and I'd like to, I'm with Director Belisle, and I believe that we empower you with the ability to do that, and we should leave it there.
Yeah, and I'll just say again, to hire people right now does not make sense. To talk about hiring people this coming year, great, and to have some of these one-time, particularly it's material investments that will go directly to help kids, whether it's the library books or the instruments or the athletics equipment, that's great. But I wouldn't support an amendment to spend on people for a short term, especially considering the amount of time it would take staff to ramp up a mid-year hiring process in a short term. I'd rather they were out looking for awesome teachers for this coming year. Okay, other comments on this amendment? Director Buell.
Yeah, the strategic area around, we're very strategic around our sports programs that we're trying to put in. So to suggest that that's not strategic, I mean, we're strategic around it. This, I think that any teachers we hired now as reading teachers, and we laid off tons of reading teachers in our town. So, I mean, tons of reading teachers. We're going to put them back. We're going to put them back. So if we hired them now and we got good ones, I'm not for hiring poor ones, but if we hire good ones now, they're going to be around. They're going to be around. They're going to figure it out. And we could tell them, hey, you're probably, and we could put them in this next budget and make sure they're there and get started on helping children to read. It just seemed, we had people hired on this, and you said, well, it's a 3-year commitment maybe, but I don't see why we couldn't tell people, hey, look, they're looking, there's a lot of teachers out there maybe who are looking for reading jobs who are pretty darn good.
All right, let's
So
go ahead and
I think
vote.
it's very strategic, because hiring people that teach children to read is the best strategy that we have for 3rd grade reading, which is our main goal, and so doing that is about as strategic as you could possibly get.
I guess from my perspective, I wouldn't question whether it's strategic to hire great reading teachers. It's just the timing of doing so in February from job that would be from February through June. But let's go ahead and vote on this amendment. All those in favor of the amendment from Director Buell, please indicate by saying aye.
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 So I'm sorry, that was 3. All those opposed, please indicate by saying no.
No.
So the amendment fails with 4 opposed, 3 in favor, and Student Representative Jaswal voting?
No.
No. Okay. All right, so we're back to now ready to vote, I hope, on Resolution 5018 as amended. Any clarification needed by staff or any members on what we're voting on at this point? You got it? Awesome. Okay. Let's now vote on Resolution 5018 as amended. All those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
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 All opposed, please indicate by saying no. All right, the motion passes unanimously, 7-0. Excuse me, the resolution passes 7-0 with Student Representative Jaswal voting.
Yes.
Yes, okay. Thank you all very much. Superintendent Smith, thank you so much for bringing forth this plan and for listening to all the input. And we look forward to hearing the results and how this rolls out. And I know, again, appreciation to all the staff who weighed in quickly on that survey, which really made a big difference. And we're looking forward to hearing how these short-term, small, we know not enough, but hopefully very welcome investments will make a difference. And I'll say this at the end again as well, but just for folks who are thinking in terms of the upcoming budget, I know soon word's going to go out. We're going to have a number of town halls around the budget, so be looking for those. So as we move into the full budget process for this coming year, we want to hear from everybody. Okay, so with that, we will now move on to an update on eliminating disproportionate discipline, the disproportionate discipline rate, which is one of the top priorities of this district. Superintendent Smith, would you like to introduce this item?
I would, and I'll introduce Lorenzo Poe, who's our Chief Equity and Diversity Officer and Director of Partnerships, Sarah Singer, who's the Senior Director of System Planning and Performance, Rick Kirschman, who's the Program Director of Supportive School Discipline, Kevin Bacon, our Principal at Boyce Elliott Humboldt, as the primary presenters, and they'll introduce others. And Kevin Bacon, I think you're up at the table here too. I think you're up at the table too. There's another chair right over there.
Thank you all so much for being here, and thank you for your patience and waiting for this item to come up. We really appreciate you being here.
Thank you. Lorenzo Poe, over to you.
Good evening, Madam Co-Chairs, Board Members, Superintendent Smith, Lorenzo Poe, and it is a great pleasure to be before you again to bring you some information on the updating of our exclusionary discipline. To remind you that our commitment as a district is to reduce exclusionary discipline and increase instructional time for all students. The superintendent has set out as one of her 3 priorities a goal around exclusionary discipline and the closing of disparities around exclusionary discipline and its disparities. She calls for a 50% reduction in overall exclusionary discipline and a 50% reduction in disproportionality in exclusionary discipline in 2 years. In addition to that, she has made an agreement to participate in a broad-based community dialogue and discussion led by Portland Parents Union to determine a set of recommendations that could be formed as a basis of a moratorium or ways to look at how to further eliminate exclusions as a part of what the district does. So tonight we want to talk to you about some of the data. We want to talk to you about some of the strategies and programs that we're putting in place and the kinds of things we believe it takes to address this issue. And so with that, let me turn it over to Sarah Singer, who will walk you through some of the key data elements. Then we'll have an opportunity to hear from Rick Kirshner, who is the manager for our climate department, and also then have an opportunity for you to hear from a school that is actively involved in the work and beginning to make strides towards closing, eliminating the disparities and exclusion, and then we'll answer questions. So with that, Sarah?
All right, thanks, Lorenzo. Before I begin, I think it's important to note that when I talk about exclusionary discipline, in the context of this presentation and when I present data, I'm talking about when a student is either expelled or suspended from school. And so what I'm going to show you is our percent of students who have been excluded at least once over a time period from 2007 to 2014, 13-14. And so what we note is that for our overall population, 7.1% of our students had been excluded at least once in 2007 and 8. That number is now 3.3% for the 2013-14 year. So that's a reduction really it's really been cut in half, basically. In contrast, we can look at our African American or our Black population, and what we see is that in 2007-8, approximately 18% of Black students had been excluded at least once. In 2013-14, it had dropped to 10.5%. However, when you compare that to our white population, what you'll see is that over time, our white population has also decreased in terms of the amount of exclusions that they experience. In 2013-14, it was 2.3% of our white population who had experienced an exclusion. So what you can note is that if you look at our Black population at 10.5% being excluded for 2013-14 versus our white population at 2.3%, that's about 4.5 times the rate. So we call that the relative rate, and that has been it's not been growing over time, but it's also not been shrinking over time. And so this is why we have an exclusionary goal that's explicitly targeting the disproportionality of exclusion, not just the amount of exclusion overall. The other critical group that I think sometimes gets overlooked is our Native American population. This group has been our second most excluded group for at least the last 3 years that I've looked at this data. So I think it's safe to say that that is a trend. So I'm going to present this next set of data is on our 4-year graduation rate and by presence or absence of exclusion during high school. And so I'm just going to caveat that this is 2012-13 graduation rate data. We're working on updating it for the 13-14 grad rate data, but I believe the trends will still be similar. So students who have never been excluded from high school have a 68% graduation rate. If they've been excluded at least once, it drops to 43%. Excluded between 2 and 5 times, it drops to 34%. And finally, if you've been excluded between 5 and 10 times, we see those students graduating at 20% within 4 years. At Portland Public Schools, we are actively seeking to disaggregate all of the data that we present by both race and gender. And so we've done that here. Percent of students excluded at least once by gender and race for the 13-14 school year. And so what you'll see is our black males, our native males, and our black females are the groups sort of excluded most frequently. And you also note that it then goes Pacific Islander male, males who identify as multiple races, Hispanic males, and white males. So there's definitely a gender component to exclusion. And then you'll see the remainder of our groups all the way down to our Asian female population, which is excluded 1% of the time. And compare that to our black male population, who's excluded 15% of them have been excluded. This pattern, interestingly, if you look at black male, native male, and black female, for the last 3 years, we've seen the data look very similar to this in terms of order. So you'll see black males kind of on top, both for 13-14, but also we saw it for 12-13, followed by native male, followed by black female. So we've seen several years now of that exact same order. So this is percent of students excluded at least once by grade level as well as race. So what we'll see here is in pre-K through 3rd grade, if you look at who's excluded the most, and I'm just going to, I hit the wrong button. Okay. What you're going to see right here is that red triangle, and then that one right there. That represents our native population. That represents our African American population. So from the get-go, what we know is that our native and our black populations are excluded more frequently and disproportionately, starting literally in kindergarten. And then what we see over time is that for almost all of the racial and ethnic groups, students as they get older are more likely to be excluded. But what you see specifically with our black population is an enormous jump starting in grades 4 and then culminating in grades 6 through 8. So I'm referring to this pinnacle right here.
Can you remind me, how old are children in 4th and 5th grade?
Can you do 9?
10.
9, yeah, 9 and 10.
So if we see a significant jump in black male children who are 9 and 10 years old.
Correct. And I would just, yes, black male children and black females as well, actually.
Right.
Yep.
I just want,
Yep.
for me, it's an important thing to recognize that these are children
Yes.
that we're talking about.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
9 and 10 years old. It's
But
a
I
bit
think
ridiculous.
Director Morton, I think it's important to note that pattern starts, interesting enough, as early as kindergarten.
5 and
and
6 years
bids.
old. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, we see it at 4, 5, and 6.
4 and 5. 4 and 5.
But can I also point out on that graph that it also appears that for many of our kids, the exclusionary discipline peaks at middle school grades. Is that
Yes.
fair enough?
Yep, that is
Which is,
fair
I
enough.
think one of the reasons that we've been talking about needing to make some more investments
In middle grades.
in the middle grades.
click.
How is it?
So as we look at the data, we present the data in a way and try to center on a couple of things. As a district, as we are seeing reduction in exclusionary discipline, and we're also seeing reductions in the disproportionality of kids of color, the issue of a persistent disparity is a place that you really have to begin to attack and approach. As well as looking at what is the total culture of our district that gets us the kind of results that we can continue to bring down exclusionary practice. For us, as we look at across the district, as we look across the country, one of the things that we really recognize that the foundation of our PBIS work, our positive behavioral intervention and support work, that is creating a school climate that engages every student and family, coupled with this issue of restorative justice. How do you resolve conflicts by strengthening relationships instead of punitive measures, becomes the centerpiece of a climate and a culture we want in all schools. And what we also found that when you look at that, where you bring in a deeper connection with the CARES work, or Collaborative Action Research for Equity, where you begin to work with schools and teachers and principals who begin to look at their practice, begin to focus on how they're utilizing their practices, their tools, with an eye toward racial equity, we find that we begin to make certain kinds of gains that leads us to believe that the more we accelerate that, the more we build that kind of climate and culture throughout the district, we can in fact continue to drive the numbers down. So that is an important backstop, because that is the kind of climate that we want to build throughout the district in every school. But we also recognize that there's some key actions that also has to correspond with that. And that one is also providing racial equity training for all our new teachers. Courageous conversation has become the foundational piece for the district for us to begin to have everyone examine their racial consciousness and how race, in fact, may be a collaborator in how people address their pedagogy and how they interact with students and staff. We also want to look at the revision, of the student discipline and conduct document so that it aligns up with what we talk about in a restorative system for our district and how, in fact, we're addressing discipline and exclusionary practices across the board, and particularly with our students of color. We want to partner with families as we develop school climate plans, particularly families of students of color, to engage them in the planning of the climate, having to support our schools, having them support our principals, and support their children are a critical element of making sure that we as a district, we as a community, really are in place to support the kind of climate, the kind of schools we want to see, so that we're no longer having the kind of levels of disparities around exclusion that we've seen. Again, I want to keep focusing on this, and sometimes it's one of those things where I don't want to sound like a cheerleader, but I also have to be reminding that we are moving forward. We just have to accelerate. The other piece is as we talk about the climate in our schools, it is important that that climate is grounded with everyone who comes into the building, that they're a part of the climate and culture. So we're training our partners. We're starting with our SUN system, who contains many multiple partners from our community partnerships to other business partners who come into the buildings, who interact with our staff, who interact with our students. We want to make sure that they are also trained in a restorative nature, because it is about building, maintaining relationships, and when there have some disrepair, how do you restore that? How do you do it in a way that brings honor and to both the student, the teacher, and the community? And lastly, as I said, as we look across this, the continuous disparity and exclusion is grounded in the issue of race and culture. In our case, as we look at the data, it is in our Native American community and it is in our African American community. So we have to understand that from that standpoint, there are cultural strategies that we have to bring to bear, and we have to bring our cultural partners from our communities and providers to participate with us. And I'm proud to say that we have some of those in the audience with us this evening who are working very hard with us, who understand that this problem is one that is not just the districts to resolve, but it takes communities, takes others who understand what it does, what it needs to happen to help address the issue of disparities in our schools. So we're also hiring to recognize that in the schools, the bridge, the connector between staff, teachers, communities, we have had a model that has worked well with our student assistant coordinators, and we have placed in 6 strategic locations where we have high numbers of students of color, We have 1 student assistant coordinator that is focusing on an African American caseload. We have 1 student assistant coordinator that is focusing on a Native American caseload, and 1 that's looking at Latino population. Because it is critical, again, to understand that in the context of what we're doing, to close the disparity gap, we have to in fact understand and address the issue of culture and what that means and how we work at school. We're also looking at expanding our culture-specific partners and mentoring. Again, how do you bring mentors into the building? If you're African-American male in our school system, chances are you will go through most of your career seeing very few, if any, black men. So how do you bring that into the school and help support the climate and culture that we're trying to build? How do we bring leadership development to young people who, in fact, are some of our most potential about bringing leadership to support the schools? So how do we bring that out in a culturally appropriate way? And recognize that part of restoring is healing. How do we bring and incorporate them? We're looking at having healing circles at a number of our schools to help heal what becomes the traumatic things that happen when you're expelling and suspending particularly young kids. That is a traumatic experience for families. So how do we heal that? How do we have that conversation so that you can move forward? And lastly, one of the things we hear a lot about is the issue of trauma and what happens to both particularly the students and the families. So how are you providing what we talk about as mental health services in a more culturally appropriate way? How are we doing that? How are we making assessments? How are we making sure we're not only partnering with the county, but our own cultural providers who understand that oftentimes it is not the labeling up as mental health, but they're calling the counselor that will get families and kids to the table. So that is, in essence, the significant strategies, the directions we're moving as we continue to move toward bringing down the rate of exclusions and bringing down and ultimately closing the disparities. Let me turn it over to Rick Kirschman so he can talk about some of the progress we're making to give you some more in-depth around the models that we're building our foundational piece for. Rick?
Thank you. Good evening. Pleasure to be here tonight. So we've started our PBIS, RJ, and CARE trainings are underway. I think almost happening daily. We're engaging and working with all kinds of schools. Our culturally specific supports are in place. The ones that Lorenzo just referenced, those have started, are online in our buildings. We continue to work with Resolutions Northwest in providing RJ support at 6 of our schools. And all 6 or 5 of those are of the 12 schools that we're focusing on this year to go a little deeper. We've just rolled out last week our slightly updated 2014-15 Student Discipline Handbook, and that was in cooperation with PAT, the small changes there. Our principals are now receiving approval prior to suspending for more than 2 cumulative days, and we're exploring a moratorium with Portland Parent Union. That continues to be a monthly progress. If we go to the next one, what it looks like, I don't want to take too long here because we have Kevin and Jeff from Boise Elliott. But you know, when I look at this, Lorenzo touched on it, but what's exciting here and exciting for me in my work and for our district here is what this represents, I believe, is a combination of both the heart and the mind, right? The technical and adaptive are words we've used here. So when we look at what is positive behavioral supports, and we flip to that next slide, well, first we touch on the care, right? Asking teachers to lead with their heart, examine their instruction through the lens of their students, you know, our black and brown students specifically, and incorporating these practices in that. So, and then we connect that with the next slide. Our PBIS, where, you know, we're asking people to understand what PBIS really is it's an implementation framework, right? That allows us in a very technical way to help schools address the elements that we know have been proven to help create those both academic and socially engaging environments, and leading with the family voice, right? And then finally, we look at the last one, and again, leading with our hearts again here, right? So instead of suspension and exclusion, we now work with staff to repair relationships, build community, instead of sending kids home or pushing them away. And that also extends to both families as well. So it's a very big systemic and philosophical shift in the way that we look at discipline in our buildings. And then now we're going to ask Kevin and Jeff to come and talk to us about.
So Mr. Poe is, well, Principal Bacon is coming up. I don't know if you're planning to introduce any of the community partners or just recognize them, the folks that are here, or this would be a good time for that, or you can do it later.
Why don't I do this? Why don't I just ask them to stand?
Okay.
If you would stand for us, those of you who are part of our partnership network. Let's stand.
on behalf of the board, thank you for your support and partnership in this really crucial work. So thank you for being here tonight. So with that, Principal Bacon.
Good evening. I'm Kevin Bacon. I'm the principal of Boise Elliott Humboldt School, K-8 school, pre-K-8 school. I want to thank you for having us here tonight. I also want to acknowledge the gentlemen that were just recognized, but for many of them, I would not be here where I'm at today, and I'm very grateful to them. A little bit about me. I'll have 30 years next year, which seems to have flown by very fast. Yeah. I've worked at all 3 levels: K-5, middle school, high school. I worked in nearly all the quadrants of the city. I worked at Whitaker Middle School in Northeast back in the mid to late 80s, early 90s. George Middle School in North Portland, Jefferson High School. Left the district for about 6 years. I was out in Southwest, Tigard School District. Came back to Portland, Southeast Portland, Hosford Middle School, and now back in inner North Portland at Boise Elliott Humboldt. A little bit about our school. My team did a presentation last year about being what it is to be a STEAM school, a STEM school. Our school and George Middle School, we're kind of official STEM schools. We're part of the Portland area Metro STEM Consortium, and we showed a video that talked about being a STEM school, but also, if you really paid attention and remember that video, it also highlighted how it is a goal of ours to integrate PBIS, the care work, restorative justice into STEAM, so it all integrates and it works as seamlessly as possible. The other thing I wanted to definitely make mention of Boise Elliott Humboldt is, I'm not sure the numbers for this year, but for the last 3 years running, Boise Elliott Humboldt has had the most African American students in the state at any level, high school, middle school, or otherwise. And so that puts us at the front line of the data you just saw. And we could not do the work we do without the district support, without the community support, and the ongoing support of our parents and teachers like Mr. Waters here. And so when we were asked to talk about and kind of encapsulate what this work has been like as we've entered, into those 3 concentric circles this year's work, we found it important to bring a teacher and have a teacher talk from his perspective about what that's looked like this year. And I want you to know, we talked a little bit, but in no way did I, rehearse him or vet him in any kind of way. And so I know some of his themes, but, hey, I want him to talk from his heart, and it's important for you to hear from that teacher perspective what it's been like. Mr. Waters.
Sure. First of all, just thank you for having me here, and I would encourage you to continue to include student and teacher voices in all aspects of district management. Mr. Bacon, one of my first memories of him, I walked into his office and he had this quote on the wall. It's not up there this year, and I'm going to mess the quote up really bad. But it says something along the lines of, the mark of good leadership is taking those who you lead and lifting them up as brothers. And that's really kind of a theme of what I'd like to talk to you guys about. All honesty, this work is a struggle at times because we are working against a very deeply entrenched paradigm in American public education. I've been at Boise now for 3 years. I was originally hired by Miss Molly Chun, excellent principal, now at Ockley Green, Chief Joe. And then Mr. Bacon came and I met with him over summer, and he says to me, I noticed here that you have an enrichment course. What are you teaching? And I wasn't really teaching anything yet because I'd just been given an enrichment course without really any guidance as to what that should be. And so I just said leadership. And he said, oh, good. And I immediately wasn't quite sure what I was doing, and reached out to a good friend of mine who's the activities director at Sprague High School and said, hey, I need a lot of help. How do you do this? And I've seen a crazy transformation in our kids in 2 years just by including student voice. So much so that at this point, sometimes they're kind of running it, and I'm kind of running to keep up with them. And so it started as just like a general leadership focus in a newspaper class, and it's evolved into student council with elections and fundraisers and dances and Constitution. We just had our first amendment to our Constitution today because there was something that students didn't like and didn't think was fair. And what I noticed is that as student voice was included, students began to feel more comfortable with talking back. And I don't mean it in a bad way, I mean talking back to systems that they felt were unfair. For example, our uniform policy. In the middle grades, there was a period of time where our heaters didn't quite work right this year. And they'd come into the classroom, and one classroom would be like 90 degrees, and another classroom would be like 50 degrees. And the students in our dress code policy, they were not allowed to wear their jackets in the classrooms. And the students, that was creating a lot of conflict between teachers, and teachers were just saying, hey, we're just enforcing the policy. And the leadership class, the student council said, hey, why don't we actually try to do something about this? And so a group of students organized a petition, they organized a referendum, they wrote a letter to Mr. Bacon, and to just see the entire middle school kind of mobilize around this theme that they felt was relevant to their lives and social justice was really awesome. Like, to be honest, in my short 2.5-year career, it really has been the highlight. Now, what that's taught me is that none of the things in that packet and in this PowerPoint really matter without student voice. Without student buy-in, PBIS, restorative justice, PTA, any sort of school institution, without student buy-in, student voice, it's not going to work. And I think that as we move forward with this work, we need to continue to encourage students to come and to sit and to listen, and we also need to make these sorts of institutions accessible to students because it's late and I'm tired, and so are they. Now, all of that said, it hasn't been all roses. I mean, like I said at the beginning of this, we really are working to kind of transition a paradigm, and a lot of the systems and the procedures have been evolving as we've kind of worked through it. Everybody in the building, everybody's heart is in the right place, but sometimes the way that resources are allocated or the way that staffing is allocated, oftentimes it feels to teachers, I mean, it feels like all of us are a little bit of an activity director, and all of us are a little bit of a student management specialist, and all of us are a little bit of an AP and an RJ coordinator. And in addition to lesson planning, grading, meetings, observations, actually teaching 7 hours a day, that puts an immense amount of stress on teachers. And what I would encourage the district to do is to really invest in a position that is like that's their sole purpose, especially in the priority schools, that the sole purpose is to help develop these systems and these procedures and to support teachers and students in the work. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I think not much to add to that. I think that everywhere I've tried to go, I've tried to encourage student voice, parent voice, teacher voice. You know, the things that were presented on that PowerPoint are all about making really some significant culture changes, you know, in the way we've been doing things. You think about the history of public schools, you know, there was a move away from corporal punishment and now it's replaced by exclusionary discipline. And I just think now we're being asked to evolve. When I was a student management specialist in the 90s, you know, under the direction of some very caring principals. You got in a fight, your first fight, you were 1 day out. Your second fight, you were 3 days out. Your third fight, you were 5 days out. Your fourth fight, you were sitting in an expulsion hearing. And that's kind of just the way it was. And I think our thought with that was that you got to send a message, right? You got to send a message. If somebody gets in a fight, then I gotta come down hard so that it sends a message so that nobody else will get in a fight. Or if you, as a student, you get angry at me and you cuss me out, well, I gotta send a message, you know, to suspend you so that no other student will take a chance on cussing out the principal. And so it's not just teachers we're asking to make this paradigm shift. It's not just, it's administrators too. And I had a situation, right? I had a situation, and it was on the playground. And I came up on two girls who looked like they were escalating, and they were arguing back and forth. Other kids were kind of starting to circle around this group, and I got in the middle. And the first one I approached and was kind of asking her to come with me, refused to come with me, and kind of turned that anger toward me. I shifted my attention to the other young lady. She decided to kind of walk away with me, and we just went to my office, right, with the other girl. And then I sent for the other young lady. Now, there might have been a piece of me in the past that might, because the one that was left as I was walking away, she had some words for me, and she had some words for the other young lady too, right? And there might have been a day where, you know, she would have had to go home, come back with your mom and dad, let's sit down and let's figure this out. But I got the RJ coordinator, and I said, you know what, we're gonna sit in a circle. So that's one paradigm shift, is I gotta be willing to sit equally with a student in the circle. Okay, now I'm gonna digress and tell you about a culture that I read about in West Africa. When a kid acts out in this village, they put the kid in the center of the village, they surround him or her with all the adults, and for 1 week, they say nothing but positive things about this person who made this bad choice. Okay, so here I am in a circle with this young lady, and I'm a little bit mad, she's a little bit mad, but we got the RJ coordinator there. But all right, I'm gonna do this because, you know, we gotta reduce our numbers. We gotta reduce our numbers. And I haven't even shared this with my staff, and that's kind of coming up on this next late opening. Because right now, I got staff in lots of different places with what we're doing. Some are with us, and they kind of see where we're going. Some are like, you know, we're not being tough enough around here, and the kids are all going crazy. And so we got to calibrate ourselves. All right, so here I am, right? So I'm here. And by the way, Dr. Adair always reminds me that I dressed up nicely to get this job. All right, so, and interviewed and everything, right? So here I am, all right. And the other paradigm shift is, okay, first we gotta be able to sit in a circle as an equal. The second thing we gotta be able to do is negotiate with kids. All right, that doesn't mean, in my therapist, he told me negotiating isn't compromise. Negotiating is how can we both get what we want out of this experience, right? So that was the conversation that we had in the circle that me and the young lady had. How can we get what we both need out of this experience? And I said to her, well, what I need out of this experience is if I see you starting to escalate, you know, I need for it to start to de-escalate. How can I get that experience? And what she said was, you know, Mr. Bacon, you came at me, you know, first, and it made it seem like to everybody else around that I was the one that was to blame. And then she had a story about how actually, you know, it was something totally that I was kind of misreading it a little bit. And so we talked about, well, if I see you like in that situation again, how can I come up where you get what you need and I get what I need? And we were able to come through that without anybody going home. Nobody has tried me, so to speak, out on the playground. Nobody's come up to me and started getting angry and cussing me out. And so the whole sending the message, you know, but I still get caught up in that because I do sometimes, you know, I do want to You know, I mean, that's how I raise my own kids, right? You know, if I let my youngest daughter talk back, then my oldest daughter down the road is going to try to talk back. And so there's some shifting. There's some shifting that we're doing, and it's messy. This is not a straight line. It's a zig. It's a zag. But most places I've been, it's been the struggle that has produced the results. Most places I've been, the suspension rate has gone down, not because of a mandate per se, but because you change the culture of the school, you give people voice, you know, and if you give people voice in what's happening, then in my experience, they don't have to use that power in other ways. So I guess that's how it's going. Are there any questions we could answer?
Thank you so much to all of you. Questions, comments from the board? Director Morton?
Thank you both very much, and the presenters, Mr. Poe and others who presented. So I'm really curious, one of the things that we hear, particularly around reductions in exclusionary discipline, is that, okay, you've taken, mostly from teachers, and that you've taken that tool from me, like that pushing, removing the child from the classroom, from the, trying to minimize the disruption. What is the tool that replaces it? And versus the the kids just sent back to class, where there's this unaddressed issue.
There is an addiction to suspension. It really is. And if you're gonna wean somebody off of something, you do got to replace it with something. And what we've seen more of this year with the circles, putting kids in circles, a fight breaks out and a student is not responding to the adults that are on the scene. Well, we want to not only does the student who he was in the fight with, he or she, have to circle up with that student, but any of the kids that were around, right, are a part of that circle. So for the first time, the kids who were not directly, but indirectly, and maybe even once removed, they get to sit in a circle and say how that impacted them. Hey, look, that scared me. I was trying to go to class and I almost got knocked down. Or if it was to maybe happen in the classroom, they get to say, those students who were indirectly once removed get to say, I was trying to learn. I was on my way to doing my best test. And we all had to stop taking the test. And then the teachers get to talk about how they were impacted. Look, I was really scared. This was happening to me. This is what was going on. So see, those conversations didn't happen in the days of just straight up suspension. We tried to create that. Most principals tried to, in the readmit conference, tried to set that scenario, but we weren't going into the classroom where the disrespect happened. I'll move away from a fight, but where a conversation got turned into an elevated argument between two students, even that becomes a circle. And talking about impact, how was I impacted? How my choices impacted? And when students are saying it to each other, when students are saying it to each other as opposed to us telling us how they impacted everybody else and interrupted learning, if I can get a student to say, you know what, you interrupted learning today. And there are kids who, given the opportunity, will say that to their peers. But I think that we haven't allowed that voice to come through, in the traditional public school setting. Now, I know in other places, other schools, some charter schools, SEI, they have those conversations. Those conversations take place, and the payoff you get down the road is way more than just this. You see what happens with the suspension.
Yeah, huge life skill.
Huge life skill.
Other comments, questions?
Is this who we're asking questions of, or is Lorenzo coming back?
I think you can ask questions whoever you like.
I have questions and comments.
Go ahead.
Can I just could I make a comment to Kevin before he leaves?
I don't think he's leaving.
Sorry.
But hope not. Yeah, want the whole team here.
I had the opportunity a couple of years ago to meet Kevin in a really significant way, which is when you were over at Hosford and you were working with your Somali population. And there was a documentary made of your work, and it was called Lessons of War in Basketball. And if nobody's seen that, I would ask us to make it available to every Portland Public School employee, because it is so powerful. And the story that you just told reminds me of your ability to lean in rather than to back away. And I just want to thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
If I may add, there was another video you made called The Khaki Dance.
Oh, yeah.
Which has, and I'm wondering if that affects some credibility with the students. There are.
It's on YouTube.
Yeah.
What's that?
It's on YouTube.
I know it's on
Yeah,
YouTube.
it's on the website. Yeah.
Sorry.
Director Buell, you have a question?
I'm really opposed to suspensions right down the line. Always have been, really. I've never figured out why we were helping kids by sending them home to watch television or to do pornography on the internet or whatever they're doing at home. What I'm going to say has to do with kindergarten through 8th grade, not high school. But we have 3 key strategies that are outlined in the material that we have from the administration here. First is the PBIS, Cultural Response PBIS, which is a great program. I'm 100% for it. We need to really, sometimes we don't do it as well as we could. We kind of hold back a little on it, but that's a different matter. Restorative justice, I'm a huge supporter. I think it's wonderful, the restorative justice program that we're doing. And the new care teams, I'm going to sit down with Lorenzo and we're going to talk a little bit about how we do that, but that idea is a terrific idea. But there's some other things that the 40 years of teaching that I had says are important, and one of them is that we have an overall disciplinary plan, a foundation in each school, so it's clear what we're doing, and consequences are, to some degree, part of that plan, and if we forget, they're going to end up one way or the other. And so thinking that through and making sure that plan works, that we already have in each school, and I've been in schools where they had it, and I've been in schools where they haven't had it. It makes a heck of a difference. If you do have, because you have to have that foundation at the school to build on top of. If you don't build on top of that foundation, then you can do all these other things, but they don't work nearly as well because you don't have the foundation of how the school's set up. And one of the things that's critically important in that is to have the principals and the teachers working together and getting them, as you said, Kevin, online with you and working together. We have a lot of conflict out there in our schools. We've had incredible conflict in the past. Look at the TEL survey, going back to that again, and look at how that all works. We've got to get rid of that dynamic in our schools. We have to have everybody working together in each of our schools. Another is we need to have counselors. We need to have people who can take the time to sit down with kids who are skilled at that and work with specific children and help them with their behavior. That needs to take place. We're still short of those. We need to have that parent connection, as Lorenzo said, where we're really connecting the parents into our schools. We have some real incredible struggles, and we work our tail off maybe to do that. But we've got schools. I talked to a principal that has 200 kids, 2 or more grade levels behind, and they can't field enough people in that school to have a PTA. Well, that makes that tough. It makes it a tough go in that situation. We also need to have good, solid wraparound services that we need to put together better than we have, so we know where to go and how to get that group of people who can support the family of the children in our school, the families, and help children make those transitions. We need to have engaging activities and things that tie kids into school. I taught in Woodburn for 5 years, years and years ago. And Woodburn, which has 90% Hispanic kids, and it's not a very well-to-do community. They're running 90% approximately graduation rate. And they had an article on it in the Oregonian here the last week, and they asked the superintendent, what are the things you're doing? Boom, 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 boom. Well, I have a friend who taught 30 years in Woodburn, and he's a terrific teacher. And he went and asked one of the people who works there, what are you doing in Woodburn that's getting 90%? I mean, gee, many, it's off the charts. And he said, try really, really hard to involve kids in athletics and activities and things that tie them into the school and get them going. Well, we charge kids $200 to play a sport in this school system. We don't have any athletics hardly at all. We're starting to do it, but we need to really do it and say this is an important part of this idea where we're going to get the disparities down, where we're going to increase our children doing a better job in school. We need to do our hiring practice. I've talked for years, actually since 1981, about a hiring practice that would help us with our hiring more teachers of color. And I still can't get us to really get serious about doing our own thing, but it's not quick enough, early enough, or hard enough. We've got we need those teams to put together like Hillsborough has, and that's more high school, but we need to think about it particularly in the middle school where we put teams together to work with individual kids and support them and work with them in that manner more than we are. And the last thing, we need to teach kids to read early on, and in order to do that, we need more reading teachers, we need librarians, and we need all those things. And my concern is, in the board book, we've got 3 things that we're doing, and they're all culturally relevant. They're all good things, but it's not going to do it if that's all we do. We have to do these other things too, and we will do them if we're genuinely serious about getting this disparity, this disciplinary disparity, the school to prison pipeline. If we don't do those things too, we're not going to get there. This other stuff will really, really help, but it's not going to get us there. And if we're serious about it, we'll put all this stuff together, and we won't do it in 14 schools. These things I'm talking about, we can do in all schools. We could do them in all schools tomorrow to some degree. And that's my feeling about it. And people can say, well, too bad you don't know anything. But yeah, I spent a long time in school, and I've thought a tremendous amount about this. And these other things are also critically important to do, not just what we're doing around the culturally relevant stuff, but these other things that support it, that allow it to be successful. Because it's not going to be successful solely by itself. It's only going to be successful if you have the cauldron that you can put it in, and it will go throughout the whole system. So that's what I think about it. Thank you very much for allowing me to talk on it.
First, I just want to say thanks for the presentation. I can't help but say I appreciate the progress we're making. And we saw only 7 years worth of data, and I bet that if we looked back at 1970 or 80 something, when some of the members who are either presenting or still on the board or back on the board, the numbers haven't changed significantly, that this is still a disparity. It is a different way. You pointed out, Mr. Bacon, right? It used to be corporal punishment, now it's expulsion. What will we come up next? So I appreciate that, and while there are 3 outlines, three things in the memo that we talked about: restorative justice, culturally responsive PBIS, and the care teams. Restorative justice, first of all, somebody I really respect one time said, be careful about programs because programs come and go. But what I like about restorative justice and or restorative practices, right, is it works on the relationship. It works, how do we restore that relationship? And so my worry when I read the memo a little bit is it feels a little clinical, which as I read it, it reflects a culture I'm very familiar with, but may actually be adding to the disparity, which I feel like is much more relationship-based. So I was really glad to hear you, Mr. Poe, talk about mentorship. I know that I also heard you talk about the student assistant coordinators, and I think we have a couple over here. And I think about how important it is, and Mr. Bacon, you just gave an example, Mr. Waters, you just gave an example about how important it is that we have staff that are building those relationships every single day, whether it's the secretary when you come in or it's those teachers. And that takes a lot of personal work. The leadership that I just heard you talk about, Mr. Bacon, I've heard some folks, even on our board, talk about, well, we have to have the authority figure and there has to be a base from which to go. And what you just demonstrated is that you can be an authority by being vulnerable and expressing and being open to hearing the feedback from a student's perspective of what they've experienced or a parent's perspective. And just how important that is. And that is similar to what I remember, what I imagine. I wasn't around in the 50s. So I imagine 50s classroom, right? Kids are all on desks, they're quiet, teachers imparting their knowledge on them. And if you walk into a classroom today, it's very different. It's noisy. Kids are engaged. They're going from station to station. They're moving. Teachers are not always direct instructing. They're setting up opportunities for kids to learn. And what I just heard you describe is an entire culture shift. And so I just want to focus and say thank you for highlighting that, and that it was relationship based, that it was important that you just said an addiction to expulsion, which I really find fascinating. Because I think there's a corollary, an addiction to power with that I need to send that message. Who are you to challenge me? And what I want to ask the professionals, whether it's you two, or whether it's, again, some of our folks in the audience that are working with our staff, not everybody is ready for that shift. Not everybody might even be capable to make that shift. How do we help support those, or what tools can we offer you to make sure that that shift happens? Because I don't want to come back in 7 years and see now that we're down to something and somehow we still have disparities.
So what I would say about that is we approach the adults who aren't ready in the same way that we approach children who aren't ready to be in the classroom appropriately, with love and understanding and by being honest and vulnerable. I mean, if adults don't feel safe, and this is where Mr. Bacon is, I mean, I've got a great deal of respect for him, and the way that he leads is through vulnerability. And we can't set up a system where adults are afraid to be honest. I mean, and that's what I would say, just the same way that we're treating the kids.
I just want to add this. Part of, and I'll go back to the central place of the whole purpose of what we're doing around equity, is to create that kind of culture. One that respects and understands the perspectives of all cultures, to build an inclusive district. So therefore you start to build the kind of cultures that take for people to be vulnerable, but also understands what that looks like amongst and between different cultures. So that's the important piece of work. You have to scaffold this up. Now, everything that this district will do that will impact on discipline is done here. This is what we do in third grade reading. Because if we get kids to read, we have less need for them to have the issues that they have in school. So often kids are acting out in school because they can't read or follow the work that's in front of them. And if they can't read, and if they're not being suspended, then we surely can't get them to graduation. So you have to scaffold. So that's a part of all this, and you won't see it in one singular place, but it is the work that we're trying to do to bring it all together, and working with all the folks who see it, those who don't see it, those who resist it. But I will say this, most of the folks that I encounter have the same goal. They want the best for the kids. We just have to, as the teacher said, with love and understanding, bring everybody to the point that we're working on this collectively, and we have a chance. We're bringing it down. Now we're accelerating. I think we can get there. I mean, that's not being too Pollyannish, but it is an experienced viewpoint. So I just put it down.
Thank you. Other comments, questions?
Just have
Director Knowles.
Just a short thank you. And thank you all. I'll echo everybody else. Thank you all for your presentation. Really appreciate that. And I was actually in and visited with Lorenzo a little bit yesterday because I had gone through my board packet, and I have I'm very supportive of PBIS and restorative justice and the work that you guys are doing, and it's so nice to hear you really put it out there for us to hear how it's actually working in your school. That's very helpful for us as board members to hear the practical side of it, what's really happening. But I will go back to the same questions I was asking Alenzo yesterday, and that is, we're not in all of our schools with PBIS. We're not in all of our schools with restorative justice. If we really believe that these programs are the kinds of programs that will help our students be successful, I think we should be investing in them at the same level that we're investing in our other work, like our equity work, to make sure that they are in all of our schools. And so I will come back to the superintendent. I know this isn't your budget hearing today, but I will be looking for the numbers that it takes for us to have these programs in all of our schools, not just in our priority and focus schools, because I can see from what you guys are saying and from what we're seeing in the numbers that we have in our charts, I can see where the successes are, and these programs are resulting in success for our students. So let's stop messing around with other things and let's move forward and do this.
Anything else? Director Regan. I had a question about the student support coordinators, because we've talked here about trying to add social workers to our schools, trying to decrease the student to counselor ratio in our schools, and now we have student support coordinators. So what qualities or experience do you look for when you're hiring a student support coordinator? And if we have some here, I'd love to understand, as we're going into our budget, I'd love to hear from you what you need from us, if any of you are.
I can start. Okay. So.
You want to come up to the mic?
Good evening. My name is Dunya Minu with the Office of Equity and Partnerships. And so I want to make sure that I answer the question as I heard it. So their title is Student Assistance Coordinators.
Okay.
So I just want to make sure that we're clear on that. And so their job really is to be assisting students. So what are we looking for? We are looking for the qualities and attributes that our students need. So we've got two here this evening. We have Theodore, and then we also have Maurice, that are both in the audience today, working in 4 of our schools. So it's pretty obvious, one of the things, both of them are African-American gentlemen. So we are really being focused in terms of a culturally responsive lens, so that they also have the attributes of working with students before, mentoring, leadership, being able to walk alongside both teachers and students, and being able to mediate and lead groups and facilitate different, both individual work with students that have been overrepresented in suspensions and expulsions, but also group leadership, because we know leadership and voice matters. So that's really what we're looking for within our student assistance coordinators.
So I have a question. So
Sure.
Mr. Waters, a teacher who was here earlier,
Yes.
mentioned that he thought they needed another person in each school. Would this position be similar to what it sounds very similar to what he was talking about.
I would want to ask more questions before I would say a definitive yes, but I think that a lot of what the student assistance coordinators do can be very helpful, because the idea is to improve both individual students' relationship and how they view education, as well as then working on school climate issues. So again, the leadership type pieces. So it's both individual and school focused.
And in some of our schools, we have student assistant coordinators, we have restorative justice coordinators. We have a range of support personnel that provide that kind of linkage between schools, administration, students, and families. Also, again, part of this is built in the notion that to do wraparounds, our partnerships with our Sun System and other partners to bring that together, to couple all these folks together to give the kind of support that students need and their families need. At times it is critically important to make that happen. So we're doing a variety of things, including our community partners, to make that available and make sure that those wraparound services are there.
So just, if I could give the latest of the hour, maybe I would propose that I'm hearing a request that as part of our budget process, we have additional detail on what expansion or strengthening that system and coordination would look like. I think that we could do that. Director Moore, did you say you have something before we wrap up?
Yeah, just real quick. You know, sometimes I come from a perspective because my day job is working with some of our students within PPS, but also within other districts around the 4-county area that have oftentimes the deepest disparities, are the kids that have been kicked out, are the kids that have been left behind. And so I think of, as Director Buell mentioned, I think of recommendations of we need another reading teacher, or we need a librarian. And that recommendation isn't, from my frame of reference, going to bring the kid to school who has been dropped out or kicked out. But I bring that up as an example of what you're describing as scaffolding, and how that is a critical component of the overall success of this student. But I think we really have to understand, and I want to draw attention to how closely related this is to our equity policy, our racial educational equity policy, and our equity work. There are expectations that need to be met, and there are resources that need to be spent on students in a different way who have as I understand, at least in the Native community, a damaged, multi-generational relationship with education. And I know that's not very different from the communities who experience similar disproportionate discipline rates and so on. So, not to mention the importance of creating some sort of relevance and in their education, and that I will continue to sort of beat that drum of that relevance exists when students come to school and see and build relationships with individuals who look like them and who understand the experience that they come to the school in. So I want to thank you for that, and that scaffolding comment I think made it switched a light on for me, so I appreciate that. And I appreciate the work that's happening, certainly, although you stole one of my staff, so I'm not very happy about that.
We're really excited about it, though.
Yeah, he's fantastic.
I have to say.
Yeah.
Anybody else?
You could
Director
steal
Buell?
one.
You would know this, I think, Carol. What was the name of we used to have a person whose job in the school was, this was back before you were born, Greg. We used to have a person in the school whose job was to work on the educational culture of the school. What did we call them? We had them, they would sit down. Kevin, you remember, what did we call the people? We had like 30 schools had those.
You think about the integration coordinators?
No, it was back when basically the job of that person was to sit down and work with kids on.
Liaison?
No, it was actually a person, well, I'll have to
Well, we may not resolve this question tonight, but if someone thinks of it.
We had them in 30
let
or
Director
35
Buell know.
schools. You remember, Lorenzo, what I'm talking about, but I can't say the name of them. I had a specific name of them, and we had them all over the place.
So,
Yeah, and the point is, they worked. They did what people were talking about,
Yeah.
which we had when the principal, the teachers that I've talked to out of Wrigler, the person that they took out of Wrigler worked. It was really helping the culture of the school and helping children do better and get along better and behave better. All that comes together, and that was really working. And we used to have a program district-wide that did that out at elementary schools.
well, hopefully we can build back to that.
Yeah, it
So,
would be a nice thing. And so I think that's a good place to look at.
So-
A good place to build back.
thank you so much to the entire team. I'll just add my thanks and comment briefly that, especially hearing principal voice, teacher voice, speaking your truth is really, really valuable. And so thank you for arranging that and for all the community partners who are here. And, comment was made at the beginning of the meeting in public comment that we lack a vision. I feel like Mr. Poe and the entire team articulated the vision for the district. really well. So maybe we just need to write up your comments and put them on the front page of our website. But that's it, right? And so, thank you. Okay, we have one more piece of business to wrap up the evening. A second reading of our anti-harassment policy. So a first reading was held in the amended anti-harassment policy on January 20th, 2014. After 21 days of being open for public comment, the board is now ready to vote on the proposed amendments. And Jolly Patterson, our general counsel, is here if anyone were to have any questions. So let's now consider Resolution 5019, resolution to adopt revised anti-harassment policy 4.30.060-P. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Director Belial moves, and Director Knowles seconds the motion to adopt Resolution 5019. Ms. Houston, is there any citizen comment?
There is not.
There is not. Any board discussion? Director Buell.
I have two questions under Section 5 procedures. And the reason I kind of have this question is that I had a person I know whose daughter was getting harassed at school and was getting harassed online on Facebook and so forth and so forth. And he went up to the school, and this was not a Portland school. He went up to the school and said, look, my daughter's being harassed and bullied at school, including some physical bullying and so forth. And he couldn't get in to talk to the principal at the school. Couldn't get in. The vice principal just washed him off. The counselor was miserable.
So this is not about a Portland school. Could you just, I'm sorry, could you just ask the question really quick? I'm sorry.
No, it was a statement I'm making.
Oh, I thought you had a question
I'm
for
talking to
Jolly.
the bill.
But about something that
I mean,
happened
talking to the
outside of
resolution.
Portland Public Schools?
The resolution, yeah, I'm talking to the resolution.
Okay.
And you said comments or questions. There's a comment.
Okay, I'm sorry, I thought it was a
No,
question.
that's perfectly okay. And so the parent goes up but the parent doesn't want something down the line. He wants it stopped right now. He wants the school to do something right now, period. He wants 2 days, 1 day. He wants to be called back, and that's what you want as a parent. And when I look at this anti-harassment policy in that light, it's not quick enough. We talk in Section 2, it says, shall assure it is promptly investigated, but we don't say what promptly means. Is promptly 2 weeks or 3 weeks, or is it a day? We don't know. And then down below, complainants not satisfied with the decision at the school level may request a review of the decision by following the appropriate step in the complaint procedure. And our complaint procedure takes up to 120 days. So if my friend, whose daughter was being harassed this week, she's a senior, she's going to be out of school in 120 days. So it doesn't really respond itself to the problem. The only thing that will respond to the problem is if the superintendent will explain to her principals what promptly means, and actually what happens if nothing is done. Is it 120 days this person has to wait? Well, this person's got their lawyer going tomorrow if they don't hear back, and they're going to win the lawsuit, no sweat, because they're not doing anything for these days. So, and this doesn't, I'm just saying, we need to think about that and look at it and make sure that this policy actually responds to that type of a situation, which is the 90% of the situations. Who sends their kid to school is being bullied and says, oh, well, I'll wait a couple months and maybe you'll have it figured out by then. Nobody does that.
So thank you for that comment. Any
Thank
other
you.
discussion? All right, the board will now vote on resolution number 5019. All in favor, please indicate by saying yes.
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 All opposed, please indicate by saying no. Any abstentions? Okay, resolution 5019 is approved by a vote of 6-0 with student representative Jaswal voting
Yes.
yes. All right, and I don't know if Director Regan is still with us. I think she wanted to share a brief report from her trip to Washington, D.C., but if maybe we can hear that at a future date. I'll say while we're waiting for Director Regan to rejoin us, just a reminder to everyone, if you haven't already taken the school improvement survey, either online or on paper at your school, please do so. We still have time for that, and we want to hear from everybody. I know staff is poised to do outreach to lots of folks. please mark your calendars for Friday, April 3rd for Portland Public Schools Parent Advocacy Day in Salem. And we continue to remind folks of the importance of that. Thank you, Director Blau, for pointing that out to me. So for folks who are still in the audience at home watching this, please look for opportunities to go to Salem and advocate for schools. And finally, and following up on the recent series, extensive series of town halls, which folks have been calling us for. We actually just had a series of 8 of them throughout the district. They were very successful. So we're going to have another series of town halls with the community around our budget. So look for information on that. So any other business, Bobby? I believe you wanted to briefly share a report from the CC. I know it's wonderful news, but just because we're all
I was actually going to give a pretty full report, but I think we're all pretty exhausted. Stand Up for Public Schools is a button I brought back from Washington, D.C. I was just at the National School Boards Association advocacy trip. There was 8 school board members from the Oregon School Board Association who went back, and we do this every year, meeting up with 800 school board members from around the country to lobby on a variety of issues. And what I love about the trip is when you talk about the equity work that we do, the federal budget is only about 7% of our budget, but the federal budget is supporting our poorest and most disadvantaged students. So if you think about our title programs for high poverty students, our ELL students are supported through federal dollars, special ed students, Head Start students, kids wanting college loans. That's what we are back there. Those are the students that we're back there trying to support. And so we ended up talking with the Oregon delegation. We had breakfast with both of our senators, which was amazing. Suzanne Bonamici was a keynote speaker at the entire NSBA conference and got a standing ovation. She, by the way, introduced a bill called SMART, which is Support Making Assessments Reliable and Timely. So it's a bill where she would actually offer, they would offer grants to states to do an assessment of their assessments. And to see if there's redundancy and to see if there are some tests that you can get rid of. Anyway, we did our usual lobbying around the Individuals with Disabilities Act, trying to get back more funding for that, the reauthorization of the ESEA, the Elementary Secondary Education Act, as well as the Healthy Hungry-Free Kids Act. And the final one is around secure rural schools and timber payments and the fact that our rural communities are just suffering so much because the timber payments have dried up. So without going into more detail, it was a really good trip again.
Thank you so much to you and the other Oregon School Board members for making that trip and for speaking out for our students and our schools. Thank you so much. All right, so with that, the next meeting of the board will be held on Tuesday, February 17th, and this meeting is adjourned.